And we're live.
Mine's still not live yet. Still says that there's 45 minutes to go.
Which one are you on?
The link that you sent. Oh yeah.
So it is right on the stream.
You guys are so awesome.
We know. So till that
It's cockeyed.
yeah.
Which way?
That way. So the right side needs to go up a little bit.
Where did we get the camera?
We already had it. It was in the performance studio. I don't know who bought it, but it works.
That looks like
Oh, it's too much now.
It might be.
Before they
Going back.
built it.
Right side up.
You're looking at a 15-second delay version of what I'm doing.
Okay.
It's right over here, so it should be right for you in about 15 seconds.
Oh yeah, now it's yeah.
And so
I think it's good
I don't
now.
know why my computer not shut off. What?
Once we actually start, the plan is to close the solar shades to make it a little darker so the projector is easier. Do you want to see what it looks like?
Sure.
Oh sure.
We got very lucky. Sometimes the last time I was in this room, now they redid all the electronics.
Charlie, do you think the camera is able to capture the person's talk?
Well, I'll stand here. You see me?
Not yet. Just wait for 10 seconds.
See you on this screen.
Say something.
I can get the sound on.
Wow, it's delayed.
It's delayed about 15 to 20 seconds, yeah. People will actually watching it on the screen, and won't be seen that way.
I think it's still on the.
But remember, you get the music in the background right now, and
It's soft.
This microphone's all the way back there. Next time we do this, if you want to get really fancy, we can bring up the microphone, tape it here, and run a cable all the way back to the laptop.
I think we need to ask the guests to speak a little louder so that we can make sure we're watching.
If this is all right.
If you have a cable, I have a mic. A giant audio port one. I keep my Zoom mic in my car.
Thanks a lot. Somebody ran back to our photo with the camera, but I don't think it's going to be necessary.
Or either we move the camera to.
No.
And the presentation is going to be mirrored in the broadcast.
It's mirrored on the one you look at. It's not actually
Okay.
mirrored on the viewers. We were concerned, yes.
Yeah, I think now the only thing is the
Yes,
sound
so
is.
this would be the light. This would be the light setting for when people actually give the talks. That work for you? So this is what the lights will be like for during just like closing the door.
Yeah, that's good. It's not a sunny day, so
Yeah, I would
don't offend my sense of the outdoors.
I was thinking we would have it open for when people are coming in just to have more light.
Yeah, no, that's great.
It's kind of our version of the stage, like house lights coming up.
If you must.
There's a sense of
You must. I know you must.
they were So that we have to send, we have to go over again.
Yeah, I'm gonna go get them. I wanna print something up. Maybe a living on. Maybe a little history lesson about nest and that now. I guess it's not to be or to be. I don't think so.
No.
Originally, no. Originally, no, they told you who he was.
Oh, wait. Why would that?
As you may know, I'm the co-founder of NES.
Where did this go already?
Right, it's giving you the thing.
How much there are some fees?
Yeah. There will be a couple extras.
That's what we do.
Oh, Charlie,
I'm
yeah.
gonna go get something to eat at Dunkin' Donuts, so I don't take a muffin from somebody. Would anyone like anything from Dunkin'? What'd you like?
A donut,
Donut, what kind?
coconut.
Coconut?
Do they have that?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
No. Where's
Seth, can I get you anything?
No, I think I'm okay.
Iced coffee?
Iced coffee? Do you want anything, where do you like it? Milk sugar? Iced coffee, milk and sugar, or should I bring it on the side, or just have them cook it?
You can think about it.
How many sugars?
Whatever the norm is. Not worried about it.
18.
If you just tell them, I usually just tell them milk and sugar.
Milk and sugar, coconut donut.
coconut,
muffin.
chocolate, like whatever they, coconut.
I'll put everything. I'll be back in a minute.
Thanks.
I'm gonna sleep really well tonight on the stairs.
I don't even know when it's gonna end.
We'll probably end up being able to go home by 10,
I told my husband I'll be home by midnight.
because you've got a bit of a drive afterwards too.
Yeah, like 45 minutes.
But I think we chose the right room.
I hope my husband knows how to feed the dog.
Open up the dog food, give the food to the dog, right?
I hope he knows where the dog food is. Text him. Oh, I actually got a notice. Oh, because I subscribed. It says Music Dynamic Lab is live now. I think we're looking good. Do you think this angle will also show people who sit in the first two rows their screen?
Probably. What I'll do is
That's gonna be fun.
I'm waiting for the person to go on Facebook.
what I'm probably gonna do is when we're done, it saves it as a video and puts it on YouTube. I'll pull it down off YouTube, edit it, add title slides and everything, and re-upload each and talk individually to the account.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
That'll take a couple of days probably to
Just-
actually get done.
If the first two row peoples have laptops, perhaps we suggest they move down.
We just let them know.
We're watching.
Well, just the cameras obviously here. We're live broadcasting. Don't watch anything that you don't want broadcast on your screen. Seth, you got any tech?
Yep.
I like how like each one has their own. Oh,
Yeah.
or just this row.
No, the front also has them at least.
Oh, just so the middle three rows don't have.
Yep, and the middle three just don't get it.
That's good. We're taking the last row.
Should have brought my laptop.
Oh, you can bring your laptop?
It's in my car. I could go get it.
You probably should.
It's 9 o'clock now. Things
Yeah,
start at
it's
9.
8:55, so you have
30
time.
minutes. Yeah, I'll be back.
Because there will be talks where you wish.
Yeah, so I'll play the front two rows and let me see how face at. Yeah.
right here. Something.
Yeah, so there's stuff. Yeah, so the whole year was set.
Probably let's get.
Yeah.
There are like really big guys. I don't think they fit through this school by one.
All right.
You know, I can pay for them.
I can do it. It's okay. Do you want to?
No, that's fine, because you did the cash box and I'll do
Just
the.
they do the boxes of Munchkin.
Mhm.
Just do like whatever their small sizes of Munchkin.
Munchkin's the small.
Yeah, roll around
Little
ones,
round
yeah.
ones. You
And
think
you know
that
what we'll do
or
is-
maybe like a dozen nonuts would be together?
The thing is with the dozen donuts, it serves exactly a dozen people and that's it. I think a box of Munchkins comes in 25 or 50,
Okay.
and there's little small things. So if
Maybe we got 50?
Yeah,
How
we
much
get
is 50?
it should be more than like 5. We get 50, and then what we'll do is we won't open them,
Uh-huh.
and then if this is enough for breakfast, we'll open them for the coffee break.
Okay, that sounds good.
Welcome.
Good morning.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Did you travel all the way from?
Vegas.
Really?
Yes.
We appreciate it. Welcome.
One time with me, because I am a morning person, being first.
Well, I saw you talk last year. I knew that would be good and solid. It would be a good way to start.
Oh man, I mean, now you're putting the expectation, putting the bar high. Whew. Well, thank you.
I think we met Caitlin at one point, came out to interview with you guys.
The first of our own.
Last year.
Gotcha. When I see the high school place, I want. Another kind of opposite of my presentation is, coherence. And then again, if you have too much coffee,
It'll be
then
really
you
fast.
speak really fast.
Welcome to Gotta get some like futuristic, like music and voice.
Oh, it's on. We're playing ball.
I gave a talk last semester at CESPA, and I recorded it, and then I dubbed it over the slides, because I didn't videotape it, just recorded the audio. And then I added a little bit of, first I fixed it so the audio was like listenable. But then I added a little bit of reverb to it. And then like I had this like ambience that I generated. Using the application, I just had it very quietly in the background. Space age sound to it.
We actually figured out live streaming the whole time.
Oh wow.
So, and I think what I'll do is we can pull all the videos down later and re-edit them into individual talks, and then we'll have for central database of the best talks, later, so we have videos. This is the first year? No, this is like 14th or 15th year. It's the first time we've held it here.
Oh, I see.
So, last year, for many years, I was UCONN, USAN first. Before that, we started at Yale. By the way, we'll see you at your son's wedding. I didn't realize until the second time I put, oh, that's quick as that. And Michael and Claudius have been trying to get here for as many talks as their jet lag allows, because they just get down to Europe.
I wasn't sure they'll be there long enough to get to it.
Despite our visions, half is one big happy
We all get together. If you guys want, there's actually an email list for this, separate from the conference series. So I'm going to try to get on the website and the automatic sign up. So I'll send that out to CESPA with certain, so that next time, because most of the email lists haven't sent out the nest, go just to the nest. So we can get you guys on that, so we don't miss you next time.
Sweet.
Seth, did you get an email from John Piper about 1776?
I did.
Awesome. Okay, plan?
Yeah. I just emailed him yesterday.
That's one of my all-time favorites that I have.
What is it?
Here, Connecticut together, stuff that I will play in the orchestras for the musicals, as for the side team. They're doing Shrek next month, and then for June 1776. Zero travel.
Act is filled with musicians and music obsessed people.
Yeah, our whole lab was musicians.
Everybody.
My favorite person of the night.
Anything for each other.
We had a few as well. So,
Extra money, and you sent them for money.
yeah,
We'll just wait till everyone's finished.
and this way, it's right there. And this way, there's extra, we have this coffee.
I didn't get it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is a hot thing. You want the bag?
The answer is my name, yes, there's a good one. HDMI, VGA.
Oh, so you got
The system had HDMI.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I want to have to like. Sometimes people would have to like. Videos, basically like the block past the shotgun.
The screen is really no, there's no screen, it's just they painted the wall with projector.
No, it's just,
But it's just morning when we start. Those lines.
I was trying to rearrange the lounge so that we're in compliance with the fire marshal,
It is my screen.
which we were supposed to have done by yesterday.
But it should. With
No,
HDMI.
I kind of cleaned it out a little bit this morning.
The VGA one to that.
Yeah, it's fine. Just cleared some debris out of it.
But,
I think I may have managed to stagger things enough that the fire marshal will not make that.
Jessica.
No, actually, there's more. Because I took the computer desk out and she's the lab in the back. And I think she got to do the flying. But I mean, it's not like it's just a test. That door. Yeah, it's before the other side. Anyway, I took that desk out and kind of opened up a lot of space. And I put the table where we had the microwave on the other side, where that desk was. And I figured out best rubbing on the desk. I think that's the main thing that we're worried about. We were talking about how like.
I was not a good one. There was a deer.
Right now, I'm probably
Maybe I should put it in the chat. First talk. Start right before the thing.
We'll chat stay. No one's there. Chat's from
If you put the toaster oven on the desk all by itself. They can't get the camera on this. As long as we don't end up doing muscles. It's really nice. Oh yeah, they'll get mad if they have to like come because we're causing someone.
Right.
I think it's going back now.
It's just that.
Oh, either are you?
So,
When you get it at 11 o'clock, make sure there's no for everybody. Okay, so there's 130. You need to order ahead, and there's 1/3 of each variety. Okay, and then also the counts. What I'll do, I mean, I'm gonna have 35 instead of 25 people in my house. I'm gonna call to the restaurant and tell them to make an extra tray.
And one thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to get here because everything else we're here now to test it.
Yeah, on the way.
We should have the count for There we go. Yep, she's they make a point because it's Joel's line. Joel Snyder's line. Surprise back. Actually, Joel, are you guys first?
That's kind of
It's always, it's like the.
yeah, I think I would just keep it in case it don't fit.
I don't really use programs. Yeah, well, you know what? I don't know. All I did for this conference is I showed up this We went to Nest last year and they sort of, you know, you do all the work, I get all the credit, and it's a deal. So I'm purposely saying that in front of the students.
Yes, yes, yes.
They know how it's supposed to work. So you must be about to graduate.
Well, actually.
Yeah, we're all people still. No, actually, we drove this.
Well, I'm working on all the. Yeah, earlier than you expected.
Yeah, I like 2 hours,
Games.
but now it's 2 hours.
Compare.
But we arrived.
Like the ability to predict something. When you intersect.
Yep. No, that's what I wanted to,
But we have them at chicken.
Yeah.
Most people would have.
It's been longer. Usually it's like kind of an area where autistic people are good at. If you think about it's really, yeah, it's a rule-based task as opposed to task intuition. But we can do the same thing using the predictive task versus rule-based task. So that's, I think that's here with this conference. Our hypothesis actually. is based on the identified population. You saw many someone they are really good at math and music. They're just probably because the lowest exposed to the population. The same between distribution and participation improvement.
We're not ready to report it.
Yeah.
We've got a few musical segments. We had one really talented jazz guitarist and Ronnie said that in 90 degrees. We had one. But he was we had a very talented pianist.
Do they somehow compensate their ability?
Yeah. You're tall.
My current slave diagnosis. This is that slave
Right? No, well, then that, we have to have,
it works.
modular table desk chairs. They have them. Well, they would make sense if they were like maybe like on the side of the room or like just not regularly. Yeah, oh, and then Chinese. Oh, but that is so, they're out at this one. Like, yeah, just
Yeah, I did.
like, I talked to him so next week Thursday. Yeah, also, oh, I should have run that, or I should, yeah. Yeah, so
How are you? Great, good. How are you? So you're giving talks?
yes. We're working with, right now on.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Are you part of the group?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, all right. So I should send messages.
Yes. I'm trying to, it's just not like a
Okay, so well, I.
Well, you overcompensated, so you're fine.
Yeah, so, and then basically, the messages, I love to, just use it. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to, I send a package that's supposed to be.
Yes.
Usually there's a little I do not, even if it's not, just.
Yeah.
Well, Aaron knows, I think it's, deciding to be very overlooked and also.
Only that, the bank. Oh, the power. What it does and what's the.
Even though I graduated.
Oh, so you're you're the same. Are you doing any synchronizing like this?
That's also. Oh, I'm thinking, right?
Okay, I don't think I see absolutely everyone who's on our schedule, but here's hoping that they'll show up before they're scheduled to speak. Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm Ed Large, for those of you who don't know. And last year, we went to Nest up in Amherst, and we got some good things on hosting it here at UCONN. But I'm very lucky. I have just an awesome group of students this year. You've all seen Charles Wasserman and Yi Wei's names on the emails. They really did the work here of organizing this. So I just want to say thank you. They also have a great group of helpers. So we've got Caitlin, Jessica, Tony, Ashlyn, Danielle, and Seth. Did I forget anyone?
No, that's it.
That's it. So you guys just raise your hands. If you need any help, just at that step right there, just ask these guys and they can direct you where you need to go or help you out. We also got an email from David Rosenbaum when we sent out the announcements, who was the initial organizer of Nest. They gave me a nice little history, so I just want to share that with you. This was to Charles. He said, "You may know I'm the co-founder of Nest, along with Charles Collier, Jonathan Vaughn, and Dan Willingham. We got it going in the early 1990s. I actually remember going to Nest with Maury Jones when I was a graduate student at Brown University and having dinner with Charles Collier. So I've been there since almost the very beginning. When I moved from UMass to Penn State, Bruno Rep took it over. So many of you probably remember going to Nest hosted by Bruno. When Bruno retired, John Kingston and Rebecca Spencer took it over and moved it back to Amherst. And now we have the honor of being the Nest host probably for the next couple of years, I guess. So We've tried to institute a couple of improvements. So following Rebecca, we're going to have a party at my house afterwards. So that's not actually our improvement. We're going to continue that tradition. And then new, we're going to stream live. So people can watch it from home in their pajamas on Saturday morning if they want to. And it will be available on YouTube. The entire recording will be available on YouTube after the stream is over. Okay. So, so let's get started. Charlie's going to be the timer. He's sitting back there by the camera. We're going to start with Jessica Blodgett from University of Nevada at Las Vegas. Jessica, take it away.
Is this a touchscreen?
Yep.
You ready? All right. So hello, I am very honored to be the first talk this morning. It's nice to see you all bright and early because it may be 9:30 a.m. for all of you, but for me it's 6:30 a.m. right now. So it's a good thing I'm a morning person, or else this might be a little bit of an incoherent talk. So my name is Jessica Blodgett. I work with Joel Snyder and Aaron Hannon at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I'm here to talk to you about my work that's been going on for the past few years that I've been in grad school, about the development of beat perception and meter perception, and how it's really actually not there from the beginning, and it takes a little bit of a long time. So we all know that humans are musical. I don't think I need to convince the audience right here that music is one of those human universals. It's a type of social glue. It bonds us together. It has cultural implications and is infused with cultural meaning, social identity, affiliation, and also just having a good time, emotional regulation, and moving our bodies to music. And we do this as children. We do this as adults. We've done it through history. So if music is this important and moving to music is this important of a human behavior, is this something that we just sort of hop out of, we from birth are ready to do? Well, let's see, let's rock. Even newborns can follow a rhythm, or, musical babies just days after they're born. There's evidence that newborns are perceiving the beat in music, maybe even meter in music, although I'm going to take issue with that. Right as soon as birth, that we're just ready to jump into this participatory, element of culture, and that we're ready to do this. But culture is something that we have to, be enculturated into. Turns out babies are stupid, science says. There's always this tension between, babies are sexy, babies can do everything, that children are just ready, and, these ideas pop forth, and we're ready to participate from the beginning. But honestly, as a developmentalist, it's worth looking at this process. It's worth looking to see how these things develop, since music is such a culturally laden and thus, top-down, very needs from how to make sense of it. It's worth looking at the developmental timeline. Are people perceiving the beat in music as soon as they're born or as children? Well, have any of you ever gone to a preschool class and watched children try to march in lines like Row, Row, Row Your Boat or Mary Had a Little Lamb? You're gonna watch a beautiful disaster. Kids are gonna be, flailing, clapping, wildly, tripping over their own 2 feet. These things that seem really easy to us as adults take probably an awful long time to develop and mature. So my driving questions in my research are, what is the developmental timeline of beat perception? Is this something that kids are good at immediately, or is this something that takes a while to develop? Are we reliably perceiving multiple levels of metrical structure? So beats in music can be structured hierarchically, such that some events are heard as stronger and other events are heard as weaker. Are we perceiving this from the beginning? Or is this something that takes time, experience, and learning to develop? And then finally, what are the impacts of training? So we have basic enculturation, And then we have things like music lessons or dance lessons. How do these impact the development of beat perception all the way up through adulthood? So I asked my questions by presenting sort of a modified form of the beat alignment task for Everson and Patel 2008. I present excerpts of human performed ballroom dance music paired with metronomes that have 2 levels of metrical structure, a higher pitch note for the downbeat of them each measure and a lower pitch note for every other beat. And then I manipulate the metronomes match to both the beat and the measure level. So I'm giving them 2 levels of hierarchical structure. So in my fully matching condition, the metronome matches the music perfectly. So in that case, you heard that the beat and the measure level and the metronome match that in the music. Sometimes I vary the period of the measure but keep the period and phase alignment of the beat the same. So I'm matching at the beat level but no longer at the measure level. Everybody seems to love this track the best, and I have to agree with it. So I'm presenting the lots of different options of ballroom music, but this is my favorite. Sometimes the measure level matches of the metronome matches the music, but the beat does not. And then finally, I present the metronomes that do not match either at the beat or measure level of the music. So you hear in that case how the metronome doesn't match. And there was a little bit of cringing around the room, which is normally what I get when I present this to music people. So what do? At this point, I have worked with 175 participants in this set of studies alone. I've got 31 5- to 6-year-olds all the way up to, I've got, this is the first experiment of my master's thesis, 32 non-musicians and 20 musicians. By non-musicians, I meant that they were not actively playing their instrument at the time, even if they had prior musical experience, but only 18 of my 32 even had prior musical training, whereas my musicians had to have at least 5 years of formal musical training and had to be actively playing at the time of participation in order to be considered a musician for my study. The vast majority of my children and adolescent participants do not have any formal musical training. We're talking like an average across the group of about half a year, 6 months of musical training tops. So, I mean, if anybody's got a line on a music academy for kids that I can get in with, we need to talk after this, because I would love to do that. So my first question, so I should tell you what I'm doing. So I present my participants with that metronome and music dichotically presented via headphones, and I'm constantly asking them, just tell me, how well does this metronome match the music you hear? Does it match really well? Does it match really poorly? It's up to them. They have a scale. I really don't define match for them. I let them decide what that means to them. With children, I give them the same task, except I don't call it a metronome. I say it's a bug drummer, and these bug drummers are trying out for the band. So you need to be the tryout judge, just like you were a judge on America's Got Talent. And then the kids look at me like, what? And my pop culture references are never on point. All right, so previously I've presented my raw scores, but today I'm going to take a different approach because I want to show you that developmental trajectory that I'm seeing. So I'm going to show you beat difference scores. And beat difference scores are where you take both types of metronomes that match at the beat level, then divide it in half to take the average of the ratings for both of those metronomes and subtract out the ratings for the fully mismatching metronomes. So this should theoretically give you an idea of how important that the metronome matches the beat of the music is to the participants. And then I'll give you the measure difference scores, and these are only the case of the fully matching metronome minus the beat matching but measure mismatching. So this tells you how much the measure level matching adds above and beyond beat level matching. Because we've seen in plenty of other studies that kids are already kind of like, about being able to match the beat. So we wanted to find out, like, what's going on if we keep the beat level matching constant, but we add in that extra level of metrical matching. So first I wanted to find out, all right, so the first thing was, are adult listeners even doing this? So
how do they report their perception? How do they report their perception?
Through the 1 through 4 scale. So if it's a high rating, that means that they thought it fit well, and if it's a low rating, it means it fit poorly. So when I came to started out by looking at adults, I mean, are adults even perceiving measure, or at least the beat? Well, thankfully, it looks like everybody gets the beat. I mean, phew, replicating previous studies. So this is your beat difference score, and it suggests that, okay, there's definitely an effect of training such that musicians will give higher ratings of fit to beat matching metronomes than to beat mismatching metronomes. But what about that impact of adding that extra level of measure matching? Yes, sir.
So the maximum, the difference here would be four.
There.
They were perfect.
So, yeah, somewhere around 3.
Okay.
So adding in, or so what's the effect of that, adding in an extra level of metrical matching? Actually, not that high. People really don't care that much. Now, it is significantly different from 0. They are giving higher ratings of fit to metronomes that match at 2 metrical levels over 1, but it's really not this crazy effect. It's not that much stronger. People really, even musicians, aren't actually giving that much higher ratings of fit for metronomes that match at 2 metrical levels over 1. So I looked at this and went, okay, all right, well, what about kids? What's going on there? So taking my 5 through 10-year-olds, I asked the same question, gave them the same task, and I was curious what to see. Well, what did I find? Turns out that kids actually really aren't that good at figuring out whether the metronomes match the music or not. Look at how much dramatically lower these beat difference scores are. So we were talking 1.5, 2.0. The 5 to 6-year-olds are barely giving higher ratings of fit to metronomes that match the music at the beat level, much less the measure level. 7 to 8-year-olds, not much different. 9 to 10-year-olds, we're getting a little bit closer. So what was the impact of adding that extra level of hierarchy on top of it? Basically nothing. None of these differ from 0. They're not giving any different ratings of fit to metronomes that match at 2 levels, suggesting that induction into metrical hierarchy, or this awareness of multiple levels, is something that's going to take time to develop. So then I wondered, all right, I've got my 5 to 10-year-olds, and they're not showing evidence of performing like adults. I've got adults who at least are showing effective measures, so I've got that black hole called adolescence. What's going on there? So I'm still working on recruiting adolescents, but I'll give you the results I have with about 45 adolescents I've recruited at this point. So when do they start behaving like adults? When it comes to beat level matching, we're getting closer and closer. We're approaching the level of adult performance in terms of giving consistently higher ratings of metronomes that match at 1 level, at the beat level, over those that do not. But when it comes to measure level matching, we're still not approaching adult levels. So even the black hole of adolescence isn't really giving me what I'm looking for. We're still not finding evidence of like that qualitative shift into perceiving 2 levels of the metrical hierarchy. Now, mind you, I still need more 15 to 17-year-olds, so that may develop. But it's really fascinating to see that there's not an earlier inflection point. This seems to be, metrical perception seems to be something that takes a while to develop. It has a prolonged developmental course. It's not something that, yep, we're ready to rock as soon as we come out of the womb. So if you want to see them all together, to see that beautiful developmental trajectory, you see a bigger shift between the 7 to 8 and the 9 to 10-year-olds. But other than that, for the beat perception, so the ratings of the beat matching metronomes higher than the beat mismatching metronomes, you get this beautiful, beautiful curve just showing that we're getting better and better at it throughout time. This is something that develops slowly. It's not something that just develops early and stays put at adult levels. As for the impact of measure level perception on top of beat matching, we really aren't seeing that difference until something seems to shift between the ages of 17 and college age. So what about the impact of measure matching alone? So if the way we did the beat difference scores, it's just the effects of beat over beat mismatching. Well, what about if you just say, all right, what about the effects of measure matching over top of measure mismatching? So in this case, it would be both measure matching and metronome conditions over top minus the average of both mismatch, or the fully asynchronous. So we've seen these results. Adding just measure matching alone doesn't really do it for anybody except musicians. So this right here is the strongest evidence of the impact of training on measure level perception. What this means is that even if the measure matched but the beat mismatched, musicians were still likely to give it a higher rating than those fully mismatched in metronomes. Where we didn't see that evidence in adults, and we certainly did not see that evidence in children, who were probably paying much more attention to the beat level information and were giving lower ratings of fit, despite the point of synchrony once every measure. So, and yes, go ahead.
Sorry if you said this, but how old were the adults?
The adults ranged, so the non-musician adults ranged, I believe, from 18 to 24. The musician adults in this particular study ranged from 18 to 35, and the average was about 25, whereas the average for the non-musicians was about 21.
You can tell me if you're gonna cover this in your next slide, but it seems surprising to me that about half of your non-musicians, I think you said, had previous musical experience, and they seem to be still much worse than the actively practicing musicians.
Yeah.
So you think that's like a very fleeting skill to have?
I'm not really sure. So there was also a large amount of variation in my musicians, in as much as I had musicians look over at me during the task going, well, this matches at the beat, and this one matches at the beat and measure, but honestly, they sound the same. You know, they both sound good to me, so what do you want me to do? And I'm like, so I have information regarding their hours of practice per week, and that active practice seemed to predict this better than just simply years of musical training. So it does seem to be an interestingly fleeting skill. Yes?
What about type of musical training? So as far as like percussionists versus monophonic instrument?
Percussionists, anecdotally, were more likely to be like, matches on the beat. Sounds good enough for me. Whereas people who seem to have more, orchestral or band, wind training seem to be more concerned about that measure level. And perhaps, that has to do with, the organization and synchronization across a large group and the, use of meter to do that. Yes?
It strikes me just from the music example, which was, I suppose, like tango type music, that is also a type of orchestration that one learns by growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So the background of the type of music is requires some learning over the years.
Yes.
So that your increase over adolescence is not just the, let's say, the meter matching, beat matching, but it's also learning the type of music.
We did provide
recognizing
a lot
the
of different types of music. So we had sambas, we had tangos. We chose dance music because that has very clear metrical structure. We varied the tempi, we did waltzes, we varied the tempi, and we varied the excerpt. So it wasn't just tango music that we gave to them, but absolutely. I mean, this is something that it takes a while to develop, but we wanted to give them music that had very clear metrical structure so that they weren't left, sort of ambiguous and having to construct. We wanted to give them as much information top down as possible as to the location, try to give them as many cues as possible. So just to see if there's any effects of training beyond age. So I did a hierarchical multiple regression on my participants. First step of variable of entry was the age of the participant in years. Second level was years of music training, dance training, and hours of music listening per week to see, enculturation and different types of training. In terms of the beat difference score, the only significant result was in age, same for the measure difference score. It's just in that measure alone, so the effects of measure above and beyond, or not above and beyond beat, but without considering beat, that seems to even be close to musical training really playing a factor in there. But that may be due to the overall low variability in my music training in my sample. So what are we coming up with? So it looks like beat perception and the sensitivity to location or to the beat in music does develop gradually, and the sensitivity to multiple levels of metrical structure seems to develop even more slowly without, doesn't seem to emerge fully until somewhere in adulthood, and for some people it may never do so. And it does look like, obviously, this is going to be more salient if you have some sort of training, because then you have, theoretically, the need to synchronize activity with multiple people while using their music, which may be more what meter is for, rather than, because if you're just dancing at the club, you don't need to synchronize with anybody else. You can just use the beat.
to do that.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you to GPSA, the Graduate Professional Student Association of UNLV, who provided the funding for me to get here, to the Auditory Cognitive Development Lab at Aaron Hannon, and to the Auditory Cognitive Neuroscience Laboratory with Joel Steiner. Thank you very much. And any questions?
So, thank you, that was very interesting. One thought is, perhaps one thing that was a little bit here when you played the stimulus, that there was, for me, an issue of how perceptually salient with the metronome, considering the musical background, which is very rich, especially in the matching conditions.
Yeah, one of the things we did was we presented it dichotically such that they only got the metronome in one ear and they only got the music in the other ear, hopefully to, for both cues for streaming, to make sure that they could perceptually separate
Yeah,
them.
so along this line, I think that definitely could help. But when I thought was maybe we just need to make a control experiment where we change the level of presentation of the metronome. You know, maybe making it the exaggeratory control experiment is like very, very strong, considering the background music will be like 10 dBs below the metronome. And then try, so if everything goes right, then that doesn't matter. It's supposed to not matter much. But if it is somehow interacting with perceptual saliency, and that may also have a developmental trajectory.
Yes.
So that maybe something to talk.
All right, thank you. Yes.
It'd be interesting, I don't know if you had come across any differences in musicians versus non-musicians over that developmental trajectory. With respect to, because I mean, just thinking about like a middle school or a high school musician in a school orchestra, probably is a very different sense of that hierarchical meter induction than say like an age-matched.
Yes, I would love, so right now, unfortunately, I'm constrained by the samples that I can bring in, and I don't really have any control over their musical training, and for the most part, it's low. With my 9 to 10-year-olds, musical training, when I'm just looking at them, musical training really strengthens their beat perception, but it doesn't help their meter perception at all. And that may be because music education, like elementary school and middle school, and even high school band, is still focused on trying to get everybody to play at the same spot and not so much on the higher level structure. But that's certainly something I would love to investigate. Yes.
So when I was listening to your stimuli, when you had the beat matching and the meter mismatching, I kind of liked it. You know, it was funky, right? So I was just actually wondering, and also it's a little bit, I mean, it's not completely obvious in those stimuli, but the meter that change in sound denotes the meter. I was just wondering, maybe if you take out the beats and just play the downbeats in the meter, they would do better.
They do, actually. I don't have that data with me, but, okay, so this is back to raw scores. So if I'm just playing the, downbeats themselves, you'll have to imagine it on top of like the raw scores for me. But if it's like, if the downbeat is completely off and doesn't match in period or phase, they give it the lowest ratings of fit. If the downbeat is off in period that matches in phase, so it like falls on a beat, but not the correct beat, they give it sort of like middle level ratings. And if it falls on the downbeat itself, then they give it the highest ratings. So I think that's really cool. And I think that also speaks to how strong that beat level or current level is. It kind of wipes out that difference. We really, when we give them only, a higher referent level, and thus that becomes their referent level, they're much more accurate at the task. If we may force them to pay attention to the measure level. But if we're letting them pay attention to both levels at once, then beat level perception dominates everything.
And what's your, these are all the same tempo?
No, they're 3 different tempo. Tempi 89 beats per minute, 104, and 124-ish. Do you have questions?
Yeah, I was just out of curiosity, what, like going off that question, what score would someone have if they scored the beat match but measure mismatch as high as the beat match and measure match?
So then in terms of like different, so it's easier to show it in raw scores. So those 2 bars right there would be pretty much the same, whereas, which is more or less what we find in, 15 to 17-year-olds. They're my musicians. Okay, so this is the better one. So if, you know, if the score, if they rate them the same, it's gonna look like this, which is pretty much what all my kids are doing. Whereas with non-musicians, there's that significant difference, and then it's much, much stronger in my musicians. So this is just mapping out the raw scores rather than raw scores. Okay. Yeah, so these are just, low, 1 is that poor fit and 4 is that high fit. Other questions? All right, thank you so much.
Okay, so next we're going to have Nathaniel Zook, who's going to talk about assessing musical beat perception based on simulated low-level neural activity.
It's just after. Change it to BGA.
BGA. Yeah, BGA. Yay, excellent. Thanks. Thanks, I'm glad to be here. I'll be talking about my work looking at how low-level neural activity could be used to infer a beat, and I work with Edmund Ballor. I'd also like to thank Laurel Carney and Ani Patel for their inputs on the modeling the results, and my lab for their comments on the presentation. So the musical beat is usually defined as the fundamental periodicity of music. And we synchronize movements to the beat, we dance along with it. And it seems to be a cross-cultural phenomenon that many different types of cultures have dance music. And the beat is also not always defined by a single instrument. And I have an example here from a famous musical. Just to make the beat clear, after 3 seconds, after 3 seconds, I'll place clicks on the beat to make the beat clear. Let me try that again. Okay, so that was clear. And there's a lot of evidence showing that cortical activity is cortical activity locks onto the beat, and the timing of the activity can change depending upon where people perceive the beat. But the way the cortex is processing this is based on low-level activity. And throughout the brainstem, there's a lot of processing going on. There's frequency tuning in the cochlea, and modulation tuning at several stages, but particularly at the inferior colliculus, which could influence our ability to perceive beats and where we perceive beats in music. And how this low-level activity affects beat perception is still clear. And similarly, when the cortex is looking at low-level neural activity, they're looking at neuron spiking. And spikes are probabilistic. I've given an example of a pure tone stimulus that's presented. And the below is the recording from an auditory nerve fiber in a cat. And you can see that the neuron fires primarily at the peaks in the pure tone stimulus, but the timing is variable. And this inherent noise in the firing could influence our perception of beats. So I was interested in incorporating this, looking at simulated low-level neural activity, and then seeing how we could infer a beat from that. And I'll be addressing the following questions. Is there a frequency dependence to beat induction? What is the most salient beat frequency, or I'll refer to it as tempo for a lot of this talk? And how might we identify the tempo of real music? To simulate low-level neural activity, I used two well-established models of auditory processing. The audio signal is fed into a series of auditory nerve fibers that are frequency tuned and include compression and low-pass filtering and adaptation that's associated with the way auditory nerve fibers fire. The outputs of each of these, which go from 125 hertz to 8 kilohertz, are then sent to a modulation filter stage that is based on brainstem and midbrain level processing. And I used a filter that had a peak at 16 hertz. There were several model IC neurons, but this seemed to be the best for responding to onsets. So we decided to use this, and it did the best performance for real music. The output of this is a time-varying firing rate, and so we could simulate spikes based on the time-varying firing rate, and then sum together the activity across frequencies to get a summed neural response. And I've given an example of the histogram of the number of spikes versus time for this summed neural response. So we're taking this neural response and then trying to identify beats from it. Hypothetically, the neural activity will be regular and show peaks at particular times associated with the beat period. We can look, similarly, you can look at it in terms of the interspike intervals, which should also be concentrated around the beat period. You can look at that by taking the autocorrelation of this histogram and getting an interspike interval histogram, which will have peaks that are integer multiples of the beat period. So now the job is to identify what the spacing is between these peaks. You can do that by taking a beat sieve, which has integer multiples of some beat period associated with tempo, vary the spacing between the peaks until they best match the interspike interval histogram. So our ability to identify regularities in music is tolerant to some deviations. We can tolerate some deviations in events. And in my model, I accounted for that by basing the beat sieve on a predictive window that is a Gaussian function that accounts for some of the tolerance we have for deviations in events. Okay, so overall, we take the summed neural response, compute the autocorrelation to get an interspike interval histogram. We also weight this histogram in order to prevent very low tempos from being salient beyond perceptual limits. And use a beat sieve that's based on a predictive window in order to identify the salience of that beat at that particular tempo. We do this for many different tempos, and you get a function of beat salience. Beat salience is a function of tempo. Higher beat salience means that the tempo is more likely for the low-level neural activity that was present. And so most of my analysis will be based on the peak in this function, and the tempo associated with it, I'll be calling the predicted tempo. A couple of other notes about this. There are two constants that limit the range of salient tempos. The weighting function, the time constant of the weighting function limits low tempos. The size of the predicted window limits high tempos. And we set the time constants of these in order to encompass a range of inter-onset intervals that relates to psychophysical results. And for the ones we set by trial and error, the range goes from 1.6 seconds to 105 milliseconds, or equivalently, a range of tempos from 37 beats per minute to 570 beats per minute. Okay, so that's how we identify the tempo. The first question we were interested in was what is the most salient tempo? And we looked at this for stimuli that were 1 millisecond clicks, that were 10 seconds in duration overall, and varied the tempo, and looked at the beat salience. And we found that with the way we set up the model, the peak in the beat salience occurred at 96 beats per minute, which is actually very close to the psychophysical maximum that many people have observed, around 100 beats per minute. So this suggests that the low-level processing, in addition to the limits on the range of inter-onsets intervals, could be responsible for producing this maximum beat salience at 100 beats per minute. Second, we were interested in understanding how frequency tuning affects beat salience. So we looked at different ranges of these auditory nerve fibers that are tuned at different frequencies, and we varied the frequency range of these fibers. And again, we looked at stimuli that were 1 millisecond clicks and varied the frequency range. And we found that there was a significant decrease in beat salience as you increase the range of these auditory, increase the frequency range. So this suggests that low frequency neurons are particularly best for producing salient beats. This doesn't necessarily mean that we focus on low frequencies in order to determine the beat. Perhaps when we have many instruments present and across lots of different frequencies, we'll just focus on them equally. So we decided to look at how the model performs for this using the second task. The stimuli we used were 2 sets of 100 millisecond tone clips that were at 2 different frequencies and 2 different tempos. And the job, and we identified what the particular tempo, the predicted tempo was for each of these different stimuli. I have an example of this. This is one where the first set, the lower frequency set's at 1.7 kilohertz, the higher frequency 6.5, and you can see that for this particular example, the tempo for the low frequency tone is higher than the tempo for the high frequency tone. This is what it sounds like. Okay, so the model reads this, and we get a predicted tempo based on the peak and the beat salience. This is what it looks like for this particular stimulus. The peak is at 113 beats per minute, which is the tempo for the low frequency tone. We do this for many different stimuli, randomizing the frequencies and tempos. And what I'm going to show is a quantification of the predicted tempo relative to the range of the low frequency and high frequency tones tempo. So if the normalized predicted tempo is 0, it means the predicted tempo is close to the tempo for the low frequency tone. If it's 1, then it's close to the one for the high frequency tone. We did this 500 times for 500 different stimuli, and the majority of the time, the predicted tempo is close to the tempo for the low frequency tone. And this suggests that tempo induction is biased to low audio frequencies. And last, we were interested in understanding how tempo induction could be used in how this would perform for real music. And we used a database of ballroom dance songs, which have very salient beats, and has been used before to test algorithms for tempo induction. And I listed the different types of dances that were part of the ballroom dance set. And again, we were interested in identifying the predicted tempo based on the peak and the beat salience for each of these songs. And the result was that there are many problems with the performance. And I'll give a couple of examples. Sometimes there wasn't a peak at all, as in this song. Sometimes the peak was at some multiple above the actual tempo. And in both of these cases, the beats are very salient. Here's what it sounds like for this one. So very salient there. Okay. So we thought that the reason for these performances was because of the initial weighting we applied with the exponential window and the predictive window we had. So we think that neural activity is still synchronizing to the beats in this case, but we just aren't seeing it when we look at it this way. So we decided a different approach. We took the sum to neural activity like we did before, but instead of doing that autocorrelation stuff, we then looked at the Fourier transform of this neural activity. And this is proportional to a quantity called the vector string. How synchronous the neural activity is to particular frequencies. So the most synchronous activity is probably the beat. So we looked at the predicted tempo based on the peak and peak vector strength. And we looked at predicted tempos within a range of 30 to 600 beats per minute. So now we're just looking at the synchronous activity. We're not applying any sort of weighting. Again, we still found that predicted tempos were 2 to 4 times above the actual tempo. And this is actually similar to I'd like to give a shout out to this paper by Ding and colleagues. where they found a similar observation by looking at the modulation spectra of 25 songs. So we thought maybe this result was just because we looked at a really enormous range of tempos, that if we narrowed the range, we'd find some peak at the actual tempo, and then the predicted tempo would match the actual tempo more often. So we did that. We narrowed the range to 60 to 240 beats per minute, and looked at the peaks within that range, and the performance did not improve. 27% of the time, it was the actual tempo, but if we looked at the wider range, the peaks would 84% of the time land on the tempo or integer multiples of it. So this suggests that we're not looking specifically at peaks in synchronization at the tempo. We are actually using these peaks that are multiple integers above the tempo in order to infer what the beat frequency is. So now, why are there peaks at integer multiples above the tempo? We thought this might have to do with the event frequency associated with the rhythms for these dances, and I'll give a few examples. For tango, the rhythm is ba 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 ba. Now, here's what it sounds like in one of the examples. Okay, so it's the shortest timing between those hits is this eighth note, which is half the beat period, and would result in an event frequency that's 2 times the tempo. And the peak that we observe based on the neural activity is at 2 times. For the jive dances, sometimes they've had swung eighth notes. Here's an example. Okay, and that would result in an event frequency at 3 times the tempo. And for samba, syncopated 16th notes are very important to the dance style. And here's an example. And that would result in an event frequency that's 4 times the tempo. So it looks like the peaks may relate to the event frequency, which relates to the rhythm of the dance. So our hypothesis was that the predictions would depend upon genre, that it would depend upon the rhythms for each of the different dances. And that is what we found, that the distribution of the ratio from predicted tempo to the actual tempo varied with the genre, the dance genre of the music. And this suggests that what we're looking at with the synchronous neural activity is the event frequency and not the beat frequency. So to conclude, we simulated neural activity, and by applying a range that relates to physiological perceptual limits, we found that the maximum beat salience was at 100, close to 100 beats per minute, which is in agreement with lots of literature. Tempo induction and beat salience tend to be stronger at low audio frequencies. We found that the strongest synchronization in neural activity was at the event frequency and not the beat frequency. And because of this, we think that there's some higher level mechanism that was responsible for beat perception based on this low level activity that's synchronous at the event frequency. So for future directions, you may notice that I haven't quite answered the question of how we identify beats. We're probably basing it on this event frequency activity. So what this higher level mechanism is something we're interested in exploring. And also, I'm interested in seeing how this model performs in music with other cultures, which have non-isochronous subdivisions between beats. And that's my story. I'll take questions.
One comment is that it would be interesting maybe to compare that results to the beat finding algorithm that defined in the mere literature, which encounters similar problems. So I think it would be important to kind of compare where that stands. Another comment is that basically what you're seeing is what's called in pitch algorithm, frequency doubling or frequency period doubling.
Okay,
So
after confusion.
What?
After confusion.
yeah, or optical fusion. So that's a very common thing in lots of those other algorithms. And so again, there will be something that will be interesting to compare because basically you're seeing the same phenomenon, which is common. The third thing is common suggestion is that you are suggesting a very rigid model in the sense that there's not a lot of degrees of freedom, which is of course interesting by its own, but it's also have the problem that you're not basically training an algorithm or like these other using information retrieval approaches. You may also consider a model where there's a lot of degrees of freedom, and then you use the music as a ground truth to train an algorithm. And then that would be a complementary approach. And specifically for these like things that seems not to happen at the bit level, that would be maybe more useful. So that is something to consider.
Yeah, so to address that last point, that's something I was thinking about, especially in terms of identifying the beat based on this synchronous low-level neural activity. One of my concerns is that I noticed that beat perception seems to be very flexible, that the phase can shift based on where people perceive the beat. Frequencies can shift with different instruments being introduced. So after training, I suppose what I could do is have multiple different stages. I've seen this in some of the mirror literature too. Have multiple different stages for inferring the beat, so that there are multiple options. But maybe we can discuss this later. I was concerned that training would also result in a rigid structure, but we can talk about that later. Yeah.
From what I understand, your model is mostly looking at synchronization to the music beat, the sound input to your system, like at their filters.
Yeah.
Have you considered the idea that you said that maybe at a higher stage you have it somehow altered so that you now get the beat as opposed to the event? Have you looked at or thought about the population synchrony and the correlations across units within an activity in IC itself to see that it might act like that next stage process? You see what I'm saying? So instead of thinking just about the input and the neural output synchrony, now think about the chorus that's in the IC.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
So
it's dynamic and how it's affected.
yeah, no, that's a good point. So the way I look at the synchronous activity is by summing across frequencies.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at primarily correlated activity across frequencies. I think there are more dimensions that I could look at aside from just frequency. For one thing, I do look at one specific modulation filter, but there's lots of different types of modulation tuning in the invert focus and above. So that's something I'm interested in exploring some more. From what I've seen based on different modulation filters, there tend to be more noise in the variability of firing, which reduces beat salience for higher modulation filters. But that's what I've done so far.
Higher sensor frequency?
Yeah. But that's something I'm interested in exploring further. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm interested in where the low frequency beat salience prediction comes from in the model. I don't think I fully understood where that comes from.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So so you're asking how the synchronous activity results in beat salience?
Right. So you said that you get higher beat salience for low frequency response.
Yeah.
So where did that come from?
So what I did, yeah, here I'll jump back to that slide so that we can look at it again.
Actually, it dovetails nicely with the next talk.
Okay. Yeah, no, I did notice that.
So it would be nice to know where this one comes from.
So what I did here was the stimuli were 1 millisecond clicks, and I took so what I've shown on the left is the frequency range of the original model. So we had fibers going from 125 hertz to 8 kilohertz. For each of these different lines, I looked at a 1 octave range rather than that entire range. So the first, the leftmost is from 125 to 250. The next one is 250 to 500 hertz, and so on. It goes higher in frequencies. So essentially what we're looking at is beat salience based on different frequency ranges. And what I found was that the beat salience is higher at lower frequency ranges than higher frequency ranges. Did that answer your question?
The question is why?
So I think part of it, so I'm interested in testing this a little bit more. Maybe Peter has more thoughts on this. Here's what, so if we backed up a step and looked at the firing rate as a function of time for each of these fibers, this is what it looks like for the auditory nerve. That you have, for low frequencies, it oscillates. For higher frequencies, it tends to be closer to like a one shot, and then it continues to fire stably, but without any sort of oscillations. If you look at it in terms of this, you actually have more opportunities for spikes at more times, and I think that results in a higher beat salience. Without the IC stage, that was actually the case. That difference between frequency ranges was much, much larger. Here's what it looks like after you apply that IC stage. You still get some of those oscillations, but it's a lot more smoothed over because of the modulation filtering. So I think there's just more opportunities for timed spikes at low frequencies than high frequencies.
Is this with multiple modulations?
No, this is just that one 16 hertz modulation.
So this is because of copper ringing, basically.
I think it is, yeah. Yeah, I think that's one dimension. I think there might also be that low frequency tones tend to produce more activity over a larger range of the cochlea, which would also possibly improve beat salience. So that's another dimension.
Tuning.
Yeah, right. So I think that's another dimension of why the beat salience is higher. How to tease that apart, I'm still figuring out, but yeah.
I don't want to monopolize. Anyone else?
Yeah.
So the temporal pitch models and the interval seeds, which is basically some harmonics. There've been I've made some advances in that in the past couple of years that don't require this weighting, this tapering weighting, which biases everything to higher frequencies.
Okay.
So we can talk about that.
For sure. I've been trying to think of alternatives to that, so that would be great. Yeah.
Because the time windows for pitch integration are on the order of 30 or 40 milliseconds, but the time windows for rhythmic pattern integration are a lot longer.
Right.
So, but anyway, we can discuss that.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah.
So this is based on just kind of the modulation filter bank framework, but also in the brainstem you have onset cells, right? And, a lot of times in the music literature we think that rhythm is basically about onsets, right? So why did you not add onsets in here, or is that something that you thought about?
No, it's something that I have thought about. I will need to figure out the appropriate way of introducing those onset cells. But yeah.
I don't understand this arbitrary distinction, because, we record from the IC all the time, and predominantly, they're very highly precise and mostly driven by onset.
That's true too.
Yeah.
So what I meant
That's by a modulation
when you're in
filter
the
bank?
feed forward pathway in central music, when you're outside of that, then you can get more sustained responses or offsets.
Right, but I mean, he's not actually measuring the brainstem, he's simulating this modulation filter bank.
I mean, I think to address both of your points, what I would like is a more to model the firing rates of this IC stage with a stronger onset response and maybe a more appropriate adaptation that corresponds to the onsets that you do see for lots of different IC neurons. And I think that would affect the just beat salience further on when we look at the tempo induction. So that's something I'm interested in introducing.
And also, like, if you do expand your modulation filter bank in your model, you have parallel beat modulators, one to detect the beat for you, right? what we see in the real brain is that basically when you have low beat modulators, they have a true on-off response. So they're tuned to the beat much more sharply. And as you go up to the higher modulation frequencies, they're broader band, and it has to do with just the natural statistics of the sound, because it's very infrequent that you encounter high modulation frequencies in natural sound. And so basically the neurons compensate for this to be able to detect it by being more broadly tuned to the higher modulation frequencies. So this would add another kind of dimension, but I don't think it would change your results. I think your basic result is very reasonable, right? That all of it's about the early onset in terms of the beat, because that's the perception, it's really low frequency, right?
We should chat more about this. I'm interested in more of your thoughts on this. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, I have one final question. Sorry. Which is, so this is interesting, to try and simulate beat perception based on, inferior colliculus kind of processing. Why stop at the inferior colliculus? What's your sort of approach here? Are you trying to say how much can we do based on inferior colliculus before we have to move higher? Or?
So you do see modulation tuning at higher stages than the inferior colliculus. So I think I could introduce multiple stages of modulation tuning and see how that affects the results. My interest in this approach was to introduce the key elements of what I thought would influence beat salience, like the frequency tuning, which has compression and all the effects in the cochlea, and as well as modulation filtering, which I thought would also influence beat salience. I haven't gone beyond that. I think it's worth looking into. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Thanks.
All right then. I don't have any more questions for now.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a 15-minute break. We're right on the schedule, so thanks everybody.
There's coffee and donuts in the hall.
Hey, good break.
Actually, 3 minutes early. Next year, I want to get a much higher resolution camera that I can actually zoom in and do all that stuff, because it's a little grainy. Now it's a left turn. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get everybody's PowerPoint slides and then back up and use super because you can't really see the slides really well. So there'll be a lot of video editing from home.
It's working.
I forgot, I also.
Are you going to edit? I'm going to use super slides.
Yes.
Actually, it's not because I already know what the slides change. I'll just take screenshots of each
Are you in a particular lab or in? The correction is really
Something else.
but I'm doing I mean, we don't have enough. But yeah. And I walked in, I'm supposed to go down and I but
Well, I want to talk to you, I want to hear more about the,
yeah, this running, yeah. Well, I mean, says that we saw some papers, we got that one paper out. I'm gonna talk about it.
That's the current biology paper. Josh is here, and Josh is there's a nature paper about them. This summer as well.
Coming.
No, it came out.
The one.
The one out, yeah, the cancer. So that's so anyway, coming back, then the summer. Yeah. So, I'm going to present a little bit of the work that we did for the rhythm perception. But there's another thread that I wrote to about that basic beat perception. Actually, quite striking post-spatial differences in terms of just simply synchronized beats.
Are you going to test them on beats as well?
Yeah, we have already seen that. The thing is that it's a little bit hard to say what's going on. Basically, we found, so we find some lacking differences in terms of context level perception, in terms of beat level perception, which is basically synchronization. We found quite striking cross-cultural differences. But they're a little bit hard to interpret. Basically, it's not that intuitive. One thing that I'm planning to do is do the same program in Mali. So and we work as well there.
Are you going to play some of their music in your talk today?
No, I can do that. I actually can do that. I have I can play that.
I'm dying to hear what their music is like.
I think it's very compelling. I'll just go and make sure that I actually have a sound sample of the music.
All right, that'd be great.
Yeah. I'll play something. Yeah. Like we took a recording studio and we basically have the first professional recording of the music whatsoever. Because what happened is that there was an ethnomusicologist going there in the 70s and they recorded the music. We validated the purpose is actually the music, so it's not something you hear recorded.
Yeah.
So it's all good, just recording is distortion. Because he didn't care about the actual recording. Yeah. And so many music. You can perfectly transcribe it. It's not a problem. It's just the audio quality is so bad. And it's pretty because he basically all he recorded about that. So we went down there was a new studio recording. People came from different areas, neighbors came to the studio somewhere in town, and we recorded them singing. Yeah, I think so. I mean, what we found is that there are some people that are more interested in their own tradition, and we realized that actually they go now with cell phones to very remote areas and record. Old people singing somewhere very remote. So I think they have other ways to access music. But the thing is that the quality of these recordings is really very poor. So for them it was very bad. We share their material. Maybe we probably need to do more of that because I was planning to be an ethnomusicologist. But we definitely, one of the things that people ask for our recording is to share the entire recording collection with people that are interested in preserving their own culture. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. I think it's very profuse. It's a lot of culture, all culture are in transition. So it's not that you remain. Definitely not in the Shimano, they're not out there in some remote village, isolated from things. So basically there's constantly an interaction. And sometimes this interaction is actually more difficult to, sometimes the influence is stronger in some other Shimano, it's very prominent that the musical heritage that they had is even positioned in the sense that it changed its function from being part of ritualistic thing to be something more cultural identity. And it also interacts with religion because at the same time there's music in Chimay that is associated with the church or the church. So they go to church and play music. Yes, well, the local Catholic, this related to missionary.
Yeah.
So what happened is that they have a new type of music which is similar in some senses to the original music, but it's competing with the traditionalism. So that when they go to church, they sing songs in Chimay.
Okay, welcome back. This is our first time hosting Nest. Didn't quite have enough coffee. My apologies to those of you who got up early or are still on Nevada time. There will be more coffee in a minute, so sure. Michael Cole, everyone, is going to tell us more about low frequency tones and rhythm.
All right. Thank you, Ed. Thanks, Ed's team, Carly, Pichu, et al. For hosting Nest. It's a long tradition. I was looking for some musical examples from an old study, and I had to go back to my Nest talk from 2005. I think I did my first talk ever. So it's back in Connecticut. That was when it was in Bruno, Wisconsin. So it's good to be back here, and thanks for keeping it going. I'll be talking today about the link between timing, movement, and low frequency tones. So it's a long series of studies that started as something that we weren't really looking for, but it started popping up. There was this really interesting connection between timing of movement and how much people move, and it seemed to be most affected by low frequency or bass frequency tones. So I'll present studies that establishes that effect, some studies that get at maybe why that is, and thanks to Nate for the great talk, we're kind of setting this up, but we're talking more about various ideas for what's underlying that, and then I'll finish with a couple ideas for applications when I'm working on it. Some other ideas for things that this could be applied to. So I've been interested a long time in perception action links, and so what you see or what you hear can affect how you move. There seems to be a close link, especially close link between the auditory system and the motor system. So if you put people in the brain scanner and have them listen to various rhythms, motor areas, areas that are typically considered motor areas are active when you're passively listening to the rhythm. So supplementary motor area, basal ganglia, cerebellum, premotor areas are all kind of active when you're passively listening to rhythms, you're not moving along. The rhythms get more complicated, get more activity in some of the studies. These are fMRI studies, not very good temporal resolution with studies. If you do EEG or MEG, which has, of course, very good temporal resolution, we see there are fine-grained correlations between musical rhythm and brain rhythms. So the story is getting more complicated than these kind of early studies, but there is this close connection between musical rhythm and brain activity. So if you're interested in perception, action, auditory motor links, it doesn't take long before you start thinking about musical groove. So groove is this concept of this musical quality. It's been defined as a musical quality that makes you want to move along with it. So some music is obviously more compelling, makes you move more than other music. So why is that? Peter Giannotti did a really nice study. I think all these studies are great. Giannotti did a study in 2012. We had 150 people listen to music, various music clips, and they rated how groovy they were. They were consistent across subjects, and so what is high groove, what is low groove across genres. You can have high groove music inducing. I was listening to polka on the way here this morning in Connecticut. There's something called the polka push, which is closely related to the groove. There's something about some polka actually makes you want to bob your head, or I don't know how to do polka. I forgot to see it on YouTube. Quick time to don't demonstrate my polka ability. But there are a lot of proposed factors. What could make people want to move more? So beat salience, beat clarity, complexity. So if the rhythm's too simple, you might not want to move. If it's too complex, you might not want to move. So there's kind of some sweet spot. It's a linear relationship. Something that we keep finding though is that low frequency tones, bass frequencies, spectral flux in the bass is really important for this timing movement connection. So I'll go through a few studies that establishes that. So this is the first study I ever did. Like I said, I presented this at Nest 12 years ago. But the idea here was I was really interested in rhythm sections, and sometimes rhythm sections, like a lot of my favorite rhythm sections, the bass player will play slightly ahead of the beat, and the drummer, Clyde Soulfield, for example, which died a few months ago, the James Brown drummer, would play slightly behind the beat, and they make these kind of wide beats. Why is that? There's a lot of different examples. Fela has that kind of same thing, same wide beat. So what we did is we made a really stripped down experimental version of this. So we'd have people tap along with different rhythms. On some trials, they're tapping with high tone and low tones or sine tones. Sometimes the low tone was 50 or 25 milliseconds early. Sometimes the high tone came on 50 or 25 milliseconds early, but it was consistent for the whole trial. And we see subjects tap along with it. This is a low tone. So that the low tone is coming on 50 milliseconds before the high tone comes on. Here's a high tone coming on early.
Excuse me, my coffee's here. Anyone needs some gadget.
Time for a break.
Any individuals want to get up?
Feel free. Please do. So what the result, one of the main results of this study is that people tapped more with the low frequency tone than the high frequency tone. We also measured the perceptual center of these. The perceptual center is also more determined by the low tone than the high tone. There are a few other studies looked through the literature. A few other studies. So there's a study by Handel and Lawson in 1983 where they would play polyrhythms for people. And the polyrhythms consist of a low tone and a high tone. So you'd have that's like 4 against 3, I think. And people would say what the polyrhythm meter was the low frequency tone. So you'd say, is the 3 beat or is the 2 beat? And people would say it didn't matter which was slower or faster. It was more with the low frequency tone was what was driving what they perceived as the meter of the polyrhythm. So not much else in the literature though. Another study that kind of establishes this effect, we were interested, so we did a transcranial magnetic stimulation study. So you can put this magnetic coil over the motor cortex and do a focal pulse, about 50 milliseconds, pretty strong magnetic pulse, 2 Teslas. And you zap their motor cortex, their contralateral muscles move. So you get it over the arm area and you zap their motor cortex. And we did that while they're listening to high groove music, low groove music, and spectrum match noise. So we used Peter Giannottis, and we took 4 high groove songs from Giannottis, paid for 4 low groove songs. We matched them at as many factors as we could, so instrumentation, tempo, a few other things. What we did, so you're sitting there listening to Stevie Wonder, or the meters, here's an example. You do the same thing where we zap them. Well, their head to sit still and we zap them and those low groove songs. That's Nick Drake. I love Nick Drake, but he's not. So the result there was that the TMS results were.
Oh, I was curious how long those pulses last.
They're short. I think they're like 50 milliseconds. Yeah. We pulsed on the beat or off the beat, and we saw some. The story's a little bit complicated, but yeah, it's like they're very. So when the TMS results, which I won't go into great detail here, when you listen to high groove music, even if you're sitting, you can still they modulated motor system, spinal cord, corticospinal excitability. Low groove music didn't. So you saw no difference in their corticospinal excitability when they're listening to low groove music and noise. But when it was high groove music, you saw their kind of this sub-threshold motor system activity going on.
How are you assessing motor system excitability?
So corticospinal, the way it does it, you measure the motor evoked potential. So you put electrodes on their muscles and you measure the MEQ. So you zap them and see how much their muscle flexes.
Okay.
Yeah. The interesting thing here, we only had 4 songs, 4 high group songs and 4 low group songs. We just kind of on a whim, we put them through. Petri Toivianen has this nice music information retrieval toolbox in MATLAB. So you can put a WAV file in and it'll give you some audio features, beat salience, spectral flux, RFS, a lot of different things that it spits out. So this is really an exploratory thing, but even with only 4 tracks, the only thing that popped out was that the high group songs had more spectral flux, more change in the bass from 0 to 100 hertz than the low group songs. No other differences between the two in that big small sample. So we thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. We ended up following that up. This is with Jan Strubacher. He's a student, he's a PhD student in Austria. We ended up collaborating with Peter Giannottis and used his 80 tracks from his big corpus, group corpus, and it worked out there as well. So again, the biggest factor that was predicting whether a song was considered high groove or low groove was, did it have a lot of spectral flux in those low frequency bands, from 0 to 100 hertz. So that's various frequency bands. So high spectral flux in low frequency bands, high groove rate. So it's pretty strong correlation.
What is spectral flux?
Spectral flux is, somebody will maybe correct me on this, basically it's the amount of change in a certain frequency bands. So you break down, this is like 0 to 50 hertz, this is 50 to 100, 100 to 200, 6 to 12,000. So it's looking at how much, so you do a Fourier transform on it, and then you see how much it's changing in the overlapping with this. I think they're actually slightly overlapping. Good enough for audio people? Okay. So that was cool that it worked out with 80 tracks rather than just the 8 tracks. Nice correlation. But there's a potential, if you're using ecologically valid stimuli, there could be something else that we're not capturing with that correlation with music and creation between the toolbox. So we went better experimental control these things. We made our own stimuli. We had some professional musicians come in. We, as a bass player, a keyboard player, played both an organ part and a bass part, and we manipulated the bass. We also manipulated the tab, which I'm not going to talk about today, just for time. But so we had, I think we had 5 different tempi, 5 different grooves. We manipulated if it was going to be high bass or low bass. So we take the kick drum, the bass drum, and it was at 140 hertz, or it was a high condition. So and then the low condition, the bass drum was modulated down to 40 hertz. So really bass. You feel it. And we also brought the bass line down as well. So I'll play with some examples here. This is I'll just play the short attack lines. So this is a high bass groove. Same groove, but shifted down. Then another one at a different tempo, different groove. High bass. Just low bass. You can just double it. It's hard, yeah. We get some accelerometers, everybody. Oh yeah, TMS. So the interesting thing about this, let's play a long attack one. But I don't want to talk about the attacks today. So the results here, the groove, we had people rate the groove and we had people tap along with them. Groove ratings were higher for low bass clips compared to high bass clips, so they actually liked them or rated them more. So groove is defined as how much did this music make you want to move along with it. So when the bass was down an octave and the kick drum was low, people would say, oh yeah, that really made me want to move. And the tapping variability was just barely, but it was significantly lower. So they tapped more accurately with the low bass clips. Tracks with high groove ratings were associated with less tapping capability. These first 2 things are very interesting. So we have experimental control over the level of bass. We also see that same effect. So this is a study I did with Laurel Trainer and her group in McMaster. So we were talking about how there's this widespread musical convention that the low frequency tones really lay down the beat. So you have the tuba in polka music, you have the upright bass, you have left-handed ragtime music, kick drum. Name dropping story here, but I think it's a good story. I just have to speed up until this. Okay, too late. It's on YouTube. So I was at this, I met Stuart Copeland, who's the drummer from the Police, he's one of my heroes, and I was talking about this research, and he's like, oh yeah, that makes total sense, because like, when I'm playing at Shea Stadium trying to get 50,000 people to move, you don't play the cymbals a lot, you play the kick drum, and it really gets everybody going. So I mean, I think there is some kind of, there really is a real effect that musicians know. If you want to get people to move, you turn up the bass. But so there's that and there's movement time is also more attractive to low frequency tones. So do the low tones provide stronger timing cues? We did an EEG study, mismatch negativity, so we presented a low tone and a high tone at the same time. And we present, some of the time, I think 10% of trials, the high tone would come on earlier, 10% of trials, the low tone would come on earlier. So you just watch some sound video and this. That's low tone early. That's high tone early. We measured the mismatch response there. So the piano tones, some complex tones, overtones. Whenever the tones come on early, you get a mismatch response. Like it's the signal, like, oh, brain surprise, something weird happened. The interesting thing here is that when the low tone came on early, the mismatch response was bigger. So the brain seemed more surprised when the low tone came on early than the high tone came on. So this is some evidence that the brain is more cued into the low frequency tones for these rhythmic components. Laurel did a bunch of other really nice studies where if you change the pitch of the high tone and low tone, same piano tones, but if you change the pitch, the brain is more, you get a bigger mismatch response, more surprised when you change the pitch of the high tone than you change the pitch of the low tone. So pitch is in high frequency tones, timing might be low frequency tones. We have this story here. So we have Ian Bruce, who's an auditory guy, an engineer, worked with Delaney, and he put this through this spike count. So it is biologically plausible model of the auditory periphery. So these are spike counts of the auditory nerve. The way you read these plots, this is the frequency. And this is over time. When the first one is when both tones come on at the same time, you get like lots of spike counts across all frequencies, the critical bands in the auditory nerve. When the low tone comes on early, it's very similar. When the high tone comes on early, there's no energy in the tone, so those spikes, so there are fewer spike counts, fewer spikes, and that second, when the high tone comes on here, and also you get a second burst of spikes at the low frequency tones. So one of the ideas here is that when the low tone comes on early, the piano tones or complex tones, they're actually going to stimulate all the way across across frequency critical bands. So presumably, if you have a very clearly defined a lot of spikes, that could provide a clear signal when onset is. So that's that. I'm going to skip this summary slide.
It's the same auditory nerve model that Nate used.
Yeah, I look really forward to talking to you.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing, so I wasn't 100% sure. There's one other really obvious thing about bass tones versus high tones. So it's not, so that story there with Bruce model, it's in the auditory nerve, it's in the auditory periphery. Another big difference between the two is, I'm sure you all have felt this, like you feel the bass more in your gut than you do with high frequency tones. So we did this study, this is also, maybe we shouldn't say this on YouTube as well, but I went to Fitchburg State this year and they said, oh yeah, we'll use your great lab, and of course the funding didn't come through, so I didn't have a lab my first year. I have a nice lab this year, but the first year there I didn't have a lab, so this is my lab. So I did this study in my car, back in 2012. This is the subject sat in the front seat. We're doing someone from the back seat. They have these sound isolating headphones, so these are edemotic things with triple flange earphones. It's a 30 decibel cut, so you put those in your ear, you can't hear anything. And we put the big earphones things over the top of those, so another 30 dB cut. So they really can't hear the subwoofer that's in the back seat. They can feel it though. So on half the trials, we had 10 old songs, 10 songs, 5 old songs from the 70s, 5 new songs from 2014 and 15. One version, they listened to each song twice. One was just over the headphones. One was over the headphones plus the subwoofer, so an auditory plus tactile condition. Parliament, and this is the new stuff. Like, my students are like, you don't want to listen to that old stuff, but they want to listen to it. That's the cheese speakers. Yeah, it does. So people sitting in the front seat, they're tapping on the drum machine. No difference in the time of the taps, but they actually tapped harder when the bass was on. So they tapped more with the bass on. But another thing that was interesting, a lot of them had no idea what the manipulation was. They didn't know that they were feeling the bass. Kind of curious, actually. Groove ratings were also higher when you had when their body was moving. So it's kind of this somatomotor story. And we put this is my fancy video camera, Carson Lab video camera. So instead of motion capture, like in Max Planck, we had a $100,000 bike console. So now I have an iPhone with some flow analyzer software. So you can look at the difference in the pixel vectors, whatever. So people actually moved more as well. So we looked at spontaneous movement. We didn't tell them to move. People moved more when they were hearing more of the song over the hand in the gut, feeling the gut. So increased tactile stimulation from the subwoofer leads to higher groove enjoyment ratings, more spontaneous moving, and harder tap. Maybe that's related to the arousal. So somatic motor activation from the bass contributes to the bass motor groove connection. Write that up now. Last thing, so a couple applications. One idea is, you know, who cares? One idea is you want to bring people together, so there's like, get people to dance together, they like each other more. So there's this like kind of social cohesion factor of music. So if you've ever gone to a wedding and you have like playing it out of a boombox, that's not going to get people on the dance floor. It's not going to bring people together. It's like really kind of this bond that happens when you dance with people. So you can crank it up there. Another important one is Parkinson's rehabilitation. So I'm doing a project with some people at Brown, a choreographer and an undergrad student at Brown, and basically we have subjects dance to songs with enhanced or reduced bass. So you turn it up the bass 4 dB or turn it up the treble 4 dB. So actually when you turn up the treble 4 dB, it's actually louder dBA rating, but here's what those sound like. This is enhanced bass. You can tell the difference here, but then it's just a couple subwoofers. But we collected 3 out of 4 weeks of data there, so I don't have any recording yet, but I think it's hopefully going to work. So we were going to be reusing that. For that one, we were actually using accelerometers and seeing how much people move and how to rate the songs afterwards. And that's pretty much it. So low frequency tones have greater influence on movement timing, contribute to groove ratings and more just excitability. Low frequency tones provide more robust time cues than the study, induce spontaneous movement more. And the mechanism, so first off, that established effect. I think the effect is pretty clear, pretty confident, even though we weren't looking for that 12 years ago when we started that stuff. But I think it's a pretty clear effect and has some interesting applications. Now the next step is to really figure out what it is, if it's in the auditory, if it's in the body. Those two aren't mutually exclusive, but that's kind of the next challenge to try to figure this out. I won't let this video, but it's kind of showing, you've heard of the bass drop, bass, so it's this old trick in the DJ book. You want people, like, this is a reggae DJ doing it, but technically you do it as well. So you have people dance, but play, okay. And request to play it. So those are kind of my questions. That's each my strategy. This is DJ Abashan. He's a reggae DJ in London. Only this one table and active parties. There's one turntable, so I have to cut it off. But that means really clear. Some people, I think, is people are kind of dancing into it, but then he drops the bass, and people go nuts, they erupt, and they start moving nuts. There's this funny Saturday Night Live video, like commercial with the bass drop, where people's like, when's he gonna drop the bass? When's he gonna drop the bass? And he finally drops the bass, and people start exploding. So that's the talk. It came 2 months ago. This is his first EEG. I'm not running him yet. These are my collaborators and help their students. So thanks a lot for your attention.
So we started this session about 5 minutes late, so we have time for questions. 5-6 minutes for questions.
So level dependence of the bass effects. I think was it Todd who, and others have found vestibular engagement with higher level bass tones.
Right.
So, you know, in the psychology of groove formation, do you see like a threshold above which when you crank up the bass, things really start to take off in terms of motor responses?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I didn't know this, but it's a really great paper by Neil Todd, I think 2001 or something. It's called the rock and roll threshold. So the idea is that rock and roll only works above a certain loudness threshold because above that threshold, you start getting vestibular responses. So that's another one of the three big stories. So you got the inner ear story, you have the somatomotor story, kind of some embodied cognition story where you don't really differentiate between S1 and M1. So you're stimulating S1, and M1 is also going to light up. So there are ways you can tease those apart. Vestibular story is also an important part of it. Yes, it's a good story. It's tricky to tease them apart. So sometimes Frank Russo, who's in Toronto, he's done some nice studies where people sit in a chair and the chair has a subwoofer implanted in it, and it's absent. And he controls for this sort of thing by actually putting a tactile stimulator on the mastoid process, that can come with a vestibular response. So there are ways to do it, and we should have done that in that study. I didn't do it yet, but I think it's a third, really, that's probably the third most plausible thing. It's not the third, 1, 2, 3, but one of the three most plausible hypotheses. I don't have a way to tease them apart yet. And the other, okay.
Is there any evolutionary aspect of this phenomenon, or in other words, do animals feel the same thing when they hear a case?
I know Laurel Trainer, who's in a master's working with Hugo Merchant, he's in Mexico City. Hugo does a lot of really amazing work with monkeys and direct recordings. So they're doing some stuff with that. I don't know the current state of it is. I have a pet evolutionary story, but it's kind of like one of those just so stories, like a lot of evolutionary biology. I'm not trying to feel it as amazing field. But the story I think kind of that I like is that if things are low frequency tones, there's some reason you have to kind of perk up your motor system to react. Like if there's like a stampede or an earthquake or something like this, if something's like tweeting away, it's like not gonna really force you like, oh, what's that? But if it's like a really loud, deep, low frequency tone, maybe that there's, again, that's kind of a just a story.
Regarding vestibular response stuff, looking at physiological signals and hormone release. I feel like there was something, I feel like I remember reading something about dopamine release in vestibular response to low frequencies. I'll have to see if I can find it.
Yeah, please find it.
But then also, I don't know, I'm maybe tracking skin response or heartbeat variations due to low versus high frequencies.
Yeah.
And then regarding low evolutionary stuff, I believe there's some stuff on fight or flight response based on frequency. I'll have to see if I can find that.
Yeah, so a couple of things spring by. One is an interesting site. So there's a lot of there's some evidence that you should jog with low frequency sounds. I don't know if they've established that better oxygen consumption efficiency, for example, but that could be one potential story there. There's a social psych study from some guy at UCLA, basically said that you're more likely to want to defend people if you listen to low frequency tones. Like you think your opponents look less vulnerable, like you can beat them up after listening to more low frequency tones. That was like experiment 5 out of 8 studies. So it's kind of varied in this paper, but there's, and then about the what's the other? Oh, so it could be the arousal source. If it's kind of harder, maybe you're there's some that kind of thing.
But just, sorry. And you were saying that loudness does not contribute to or enhance the effect? For low frequency versus high frequency. Is that really, you said it sort of in passing at one point.
Well, we've done things where we try to control. So in Gianna's initial study, he didn't control for the overall loudness. He didn't normalize that loudness. So he was nervous that, oh, maybe it's just like the high group tracks that were rated high group were louder. So we actually did a follow-up. He ran a study, and we played this stimuli at like a loud, medium, and low level. So I guess that comes back to here at that point. And he didn't see an effect of playing the songs louder versus wider of the group rate. That was kind of a very reassuring finding. So it's not trying. It's a complicated story, I think. So I think you all move more to loud music, less soft music.
Laura, you want to set up what we're doing with us? You want to ask your question and then set up or something?
Yeah, I was wondering how much culturally this is related. Because I mean, the idea that this kind of thing is part of the music production. So there's a lot of social aspect. So the question whether, do you think it's going to generalize to some different group of people? If it's a good determined mechanism, you would expect so.
Yeah, so I think John Madison's done some stuff where he compares cross-culturally. And then there's a group in Portugal, UCONN, is working with John Madison. So you actually see consistent ratings on the group. See consistent ratings for group from students in California to Swedes to Portuguese. I don't think they've done many non-Western cultures. One kind of interesting caveat is like, so I use Janata's Stimuli for high and low group. We use Jimmy Buffett, what's it called, Cheeseburger in Paradise. And the Californians hate that song. Oh, that's super low group, so we like, oh, that'd be a low group song. The Germans loved it. They always said, oh, I think we have that song in the wrong category. Like our tech guy said this to me, and they all like rated it super high. It kind of like sounds like Schlager music. They're like, oh, it's but so, most people say that it's kind of cross-cultural consistent, but they're like
I just want to say, if you don't have an active subwoofer, go out and get one, like tomorrow. It's an awesome thing.
Okay, I'll just throw in an introduction for Nori Jacoby, Rhythmic Perceptual Priors. I can maybe help you with that. VGA. There is coffee too. It's a good time maybe to get some coffee.
Yeah. So it means little different for all seven.
But just give people a minute to come back.
I'm sending audio, but the level can change a little bit. So. I think it's on my side.
Classrooms, more excited cultural become complicated. So, yeah, multiplies. Someday soon. One of us to be at some point it's in your video doesn't get this. It's like a superimposed.
Will you come back from the coffee?
Nori, you're gonna have to talk a little louder. I don't think anyone can hear you back there. Go ahead. You ready?
Yeah. All right. So first of all, thank everybody for the organizers for doing this wonderful next meeting. I'd like to talk today about integer ratio rhythms. So the idea that integer ratio proportions are important for perception of rhythm and pitch is of course not new. It goes all the way back to the Greeks. And if you think of Western musical notation, basically Western musical notation can notate mainly integer ratio proportions in terms of rhythm. And so, for example, this integer ratio proportions, if it is a 2 to 1, for example, 2 to 1 ratio, this is twice as long as that. So that's simple integer ratio proportions, and that's what Western musical notation can. However, there are several theories that try to argue that this is beyond merely simply a notation convention, but something that is grounded in a biologically determined mechanism. I think neural oscillation needs no introduction, especially after we carried an APOC, and there's a substantial effort to ground rhythmic perception, specifically integer ratio proportion, in a biologically determined mechanism. And the idea is that neural oscillatory activity, the brain, that gives rise to the self-emergent phenomena to integer ratio proportion, that could be explaining meter-bit perception, and so on. Another theory that maybe not mutually exclusive, that can do similar things, is embodied things, and I think get a nice introduction in the talk. And the idea is that our body contains joint, and the joint can move like pendulum-like movement, and then very naturally this gives rise to resonance frequencies in our body. And if indeed music cognition is indeed embodied, then this natural movement would really give rise to preferences of integer ratio proportions, and that would be another explanation why integer proportion would be important to us. What is common to both those theories is the explanation that try to ground integer ratio proportion in rhythm in biologically determined methods. And if you think of this, because if you think of this seriously, then one prediction of a naive version, at least of these kind of theories, would be that it would really be universal. So people with the same body and the same or the same brain, regardless of their musical exposure, would have the same kind of type of rhythm. Okay, so that's the very naive version of this kind of approach. And this is a very clear-cut, testable prediction. Right? However, there's very little work, or not that much work, in music cognition about cross-cultural rhythm perception. Of course, there's years and years of ethnomusicology that describe how music behaves around the world, but in terms of the music cognition aspect of it, we know not that much. And partially this is because we lack the right tools. Paradigms that works well across cultures are very difficult, especially because we don't want to rely a lot on language, because this is a bit difficult. We can translate that question. What is grooviness in Chimane or in another language we don't necessarily know? That's very hard to translate. So you need to find paradigms that can work and also need to be efficient. So basically this was the motivation of developing a new paradigm that I'll talk today. A paradigm that allows us to basically characterize internal representation of rhythm with high accuracy, basically mind reading, doing mind reading. And I just want to mention that this work that I'm going to propose is in a connection to literature, and a lot of people in this room contribute a lot to timing, and especially I want to mention Bruno's work, which is one of the founding founder of this event, hosting it for many years. So the work I'm proposing is a direct continuation to this work, rather than a new suggestion that is not connected. As you see, there's a tight links between what I'm going to propose and the previous literature. Okay, so mind reading. The goal of this talk is to characterize the internal representation of rhythm with high accuracy, and doing that effectively with a wide range of population, including cross-cultural research. So how can we do that? So we use a tool called serial reproduction, but this is a fancy name to the game of broken telephone that all of us played as kids, right? One person says a word, whisper to another person, that other person whispers another word. And the fun in the game is that you start with a very obscure word, and you end up with the bottom. Why? Because every time there's a certain chance that you not actually report what you actually heard, but what you think you heard. And as the chain progresses, things become more and more what you think you heard, more and more expected, and less what you actually heard. So all of us play that, right? So, but the idea to use it in the context of psychology is also not new. Bartlett in the 30s did this very cool experiment where one person sees a hieroglyph, a very unexpected picture, and then another person draws that picture, another person draws that picture, and eventually it converts to something more expected for those participants can't. Okay. So this is intuitive and very nice. But recently, in the last couple of years, mathematical psychologists picked up this idea. And what they said is they realized that this process that intuitively converges to this can be seen from a Bayesian perspective. And in Bayesian perspective, you can show that under certain empirically verifiable condition, this process converges to a sample of what they call a prior. And a prior is a very close connection to concept in music perception called like attractors or category. It's not really something very much different. But for mathematical psychologists, prior is simply the probability distribution that we internally associate with an external event. Just to clarify what is, so basically this iterative process of like learning to broken telephone converge to a sample from this mathematical prior. This is the theory. Just to give you an idea what is a prior, is that if you see an object, the object is the observation, is what you see, but you have certain representation of what this observation could have been in your mind. And that's the prior. Right? So, and the first is an interaction of what you already know before, which is the prior, and what you actually observe. So this is going to be the motivation for what I'm going to present, but I want to make it very concrete and show you exactly the kind of paradigms that we're using. So this is what we actually do. We present the rhythm, and I play the rhythm. Okay. And the task of the participant is to replicate this rhythm. So let's do it all together. Then I play you again the rhythm, and when it ends, just replicate it, finger tapping on your tables. Perfect. I want to emphasize something. The rhythm that I've selected was not a musical rhythm. Basically, I took my computer and randomized the intervals, these 3 intervals that generate that rhythm, totally uniformly random from a distribution. So basically, then the numbers were 400 milliseconds and 534 milliseconds, and sometimes some combination of milliseconds. But you could do that, nevertheless, right? Wasn't difficult. Okay, so what happened is when you reproduce it, you didn't reproduce it very, very accurate. It was pretty good, but not perfectly good, right? So then you were biased. You had a little bit of error, just a couple of milliseconds. Okay. Now comes the trick. The trick is you take this rhythm that you just generated if you were a subject in our experiment, and make a new stimulus, which is identical to your reproduction. Okay? So now it's a new stimulus, just a tiny bit difference from the original stimulus. Sounds something like that. Okay? And that becomes the new seat of the experiment. And then we take that seat and we play it again, and then we reproduce that rhythm, and you play it again, a couple of more iterations. So it is if you are playing broken telephone with yourself. Okay? All right. Now, why is it interesting? Because every time there is a certain chance that you will not produce actually what you heard, but what you think you heard. But this is why this intuitively converge as we perform the operation more and more into what you would expect. Okay? Now, when you ask participants what did they hear, they are totally in shock when they tell you in the very end of the experiment that they keep hearing their own reproduction. They're not aware of the manipulation. What usually people say is that the rhythm repeated, or sometimes people say the rhythm becomes easier. Okay? But they wouldn't notice the manipulation. It's just very interesting. We run hundreds of subjects. on this paradigm, and none of them really realize what's going on. I found it very interesting. All right, so yeah, it's a very good, simple task that everybody can do. It's easy to explain. It's equally appropriate for non-expert and expert because, basically you could do the task even if you're not an expert. Another nice picture of it is hypothesis neutral because I started with every random rhythm. I didn't make any explicit choice of the set of rhythms that are going to work. I just random the uniform. And as you see, it's going to be efficient. The problem with the task is complex. It involves perception and action. And so I need to really verify that what we're measuring here is related to perception and not to production, for example, which would be also interesting, but just good to know what is causing that. Okay. So the outline of the talk is I'm going to talk a little bit of how we represent the results and show you the results. And then I'm going to talk through why we think it's related to more to perception rather than production. And then I'll talk about work that we did with this paradigm in the Bolivian Amazon and result that we got there. And then I'll talk maybe a little bit about application of this method to other domains, including speech. So let's start with the iterated reproduction, basically the basic results that we got. Before I present the results, I need to describe the space that we work with, the type of word, universal word of rhythm that we work. So we work with 3 interval rhythms that were previously studied. So 3 interval rhythms have 4 clicks, 3 intervals, and they sound something like that. Okay, and they can, this kind of rhythm can be described, so I play that again. Okay, so this is the rhythm. So 3 interval rhythms can be described in many ways. One way is to just describe the duration of the intervals. So for example, in this rhythm, there are 500 milliseconds, 500 milliseconds, and 1,000 milliseconds. That's the duration of the clicks. And that's one possibility. Another possibility that is possible for some rhythm and not other is to use proportions, like 1, 1, 2. And this simply means that the third interval is twice as long as the first and the second. Okay, so that proportion is set in shortcut, like 1, 1, 2. And in musical notation, how would you notate that? Like quarter, quarter. That would be a possible implementation of that. Okay. However, we're going to work also with rhythms that are not integer proportional, right? So those rhythms, we can describe the first and the second and third interval as 3-dimensional position and 3-dimensional space where the x and y z coordinate is the first and second, third interval respectively. Okay, that suggests that this representation of rhythm was previously suggested by this and Hunting in classical paper. Okay, so basically the first interval is the xy coordinate, second interval is y coordinate, the third interval, and for example 1 to 1 is simply positioned somewhere in this. Now, if we look at the rhythms that span a constant duration, so these are rhythms that overall have a duration, for example, 2,000 milliseconds, then they happen to be in this space, a simplex, a triangle in the 3-dimensional space. This is what the mathematics tells us, right? Because there are 2 degrees of freedom. If you have 3 interval rhythm and that span a constant duration, there's just simply 2 degrees of freedom, but this is why it's a 2-dimensional. Now we can take this 2-dimensional triangle and rotate it and put it as a triangle in the 2-dimensional space. And now we have a representation where if we look at the domain of 3 interval rhythm that spans a constant duration, every point in this space corresponds to a rhythm, and every rhythm corresponds to a point in this space. So there's a 1-to-1 map between the possible rhythms and the possible point in this space. So now I can use the triangle to represent every possible rhythm in this universe. Yes? Okay. So let's familiarize ourselves with this triangle. I mean, but before I do that, I just want to mention that rhythm can be repeated. So I can play a rhythm once, but I can also cyclically repeat it. Just repeated a couple of times. And this is something that most of the rhythm that we're going to work with are cyclically repeated. Okay? Now let's go back to the triangle. Let's kind of get familiarized ourselves with the triangle. So I put on the triangle a couple of integer ratio points that are important for Western music. So for example, 112 is one possible rhythm, sounds something like that. Okay, and this is positioned somewhere on this triangle. This is a 2-2-3 rhythm. And this is a 2-3-1 rhythm. Its short interval is 1. Yes. But of course, there's our non-integer ratio rhythms on the triangle. So this is somewhere near 112 and 223. It's 2.1, 3.2, 4.7, something random. Okay. And this is 579. This is a rhythm that appears a lot in Mali music. It's non-simple integer ratio, but it's an integer ratio. Okay, and this is another random rhythm somewhere. Okay? All right, so just let's see how it works in real music. So this is, for example, an abstract 1-1-1 rhythm. And this is how it may be sounding in real music. So obviously there are lots of things going on, but if you integrate the rhythm, it's simply a 1-1-1. How about 1-1-2? So this is 1-1-2 abstractly. And again, 1-1-2 because it's one interval, 1-1-1 to 1-1-1 to the 2 is just twice as long as the first and second. So for that, we can get these guys. How about 3-3-2? Okay, 3-3-2, positioned somewhere here in this triangle. The abstractly sounds like that. Okay, and in music, it may sound something like that. Three. 1. That's very common in popular music, as well as Mediterranean music and other styles around the world. How about 2-3? Oh, that's very difficult to find in Western music. If you have an example, please do that. Maybe I gave this stuff in Pandora, and then they come up with the computer and find like 7 examples. But these are several examples of older data sets. So it's not too easy to find it in the West, but if you look into Balkan music, alright, you got the point. So let's go back to actual science. So I remind you that this is, I'm going to show you a variant that we mainly did in this experiment, which is slightly different from the one that I previously showed, and we compared the two of you, so stay with me, I'm going to show you the result of both paradigms. But the paradigm with cyclically repeated rhythm is just playing a cyclically repeated rhythm and ask participants to synchronize with the rhythm. Okay, so let's do the paradigm. I play you a cyclically repeated rhythm and just synchronize it from the tape. Okay, so you could hold the task, there was 10 repetitions of the rhythm, we average across the repetition, and we create a new stimulus which is identical to the reproduction, to the average reproduction. That's become a new stimulus, people synchronize to it, and then we do another iteration and maybe more iteration, 5 iterations of those, and that's the end result. Okay, so let's see how this works. So remind you this triangle, we start with all those rhythms, and of course they're random. They're selected at random from this space. Let's focus on one seed that we used for one participant. Here, somewhere in this triangle, we played it to a participant, and the participant sounds something like that. clicks are the stimulus. Okay, that's not that good, right? So I chose it because it really moved a lot in this space. The original space really was here, but the reproduction was kind of centered around a different point in the space. Now that becomes the new stimulus. We play that to the participant in doing that. Okay, so a little bit there, but still a little bit biased, and indeed this was the new seed that we choose, and that becomes the new stimulus, and that becomes the new stimulus, and after 5 iteration, it finished in this place in the space, and if you listen to the results, it sounds like that. So he's right there. This is why he didn't move in the 4th and 5th iteration, because he basically saturated on the rhythm. And if you listen carefully, this is a rhythm that we already know from previously. That's basically very close to a 1-1-2. All right. So we do this experiment more times with the participant and with other participants. We get a lot of response, and now I'm going to show you the aggregate results. Okay. So here are all the seeds with all the participants, and as you see, initially they are totally random. And this is what happens after 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. Okay, so very clearly these responses kind of cluster in very particular places in the space. And let's see what are those things. So we do kernel density estimation, just smoothen the distribution, and we take the last iteration, and now I'll just show you the last iteration. And you see the distribution here is very much peaked in particular location in the space. What are those locations in the space? So here is the empirical result obtained by data from subjects, and here are the integer ratio proportions that we know from Western disk computation. And look how beautiful is this match between empirical data and mathematical integer ratios. These are all those points here corresponds to peaks. So all of those peaks are this distribution, very significant. You remember Jingle Bell, the Jingle Bell pattern? It's a big one. It's right there. But not all simple integer ratios are in this distribution. For example, 2 to 3, the Balkan pattern. Yes, remember that? That's totally absent from the distribution. And if you think of previous literature, this is exactly the rhythm that Erin Hammond showed in her 2005 paper. So exactly this is what you would predict if you read this paper, is that that very particular rhythm would be not prominent for non-Western, for Western participants. That's correct. See, this is the dynamics. So this video shows you the dynamics of convergence. So, oops. See, another try. Yeah. So this is the initial distribution, it's uniform, and then after 1 iteration you start to see the picture, but it's not very clear, and then after 3, 4, and 5 iterations, you basically converge on the data. Okay, and then integer ratio match next. Okay, you can also quantitatively look at this distribution by putting a Gaussian mixture to the data, and then you get weights, and these weights measure how the strengths, the relative strengths of the different factors. Now I'm going to show you something pretty surprising. So we were comparing musicians and non-musicians. And as you expected already from this morning's talks, you would expect a big difference. Now, that's not what we saw. So these are big comparisons, quantitatively, qualitatively between musician and non-musician, and there's almost no difference whatsoever. Okay? And this is really surprising because it means, A, that in some sense, the distribution that we obtain is independent from actual participatory experience. And that this distribution of integer ratio proportions in the mind of the people is also present with non-musicians that have no access, verbal, conscious access to this kind of rhythms, but still they have the same structure of this detailed complex relation between the different attractors and their different weights. We see that even in the mind of non-musicians. It's pretty interesting, it's surprising. It also tells you that this potentially comes from passive exposure, because a non-musician would have much less active engagement with music, but nevertheless would have better in producing the rhythm, so they're more accurate. And we also, of course, replicate that. That's very common. But if you think of the term of the convergence, it makes them actually move slower in that space. So if anything, musicians are slower in converging, but the difference is very small. And we have a quantitative comparison of that. So overall, it's similar in terms of conversion.
Just a clarification. So you got this data from having them synchronized with these repeating rhythms, right? Did you do a version where they just listened and tried to reproduce, and does it converge the same way?
It's an excellent question. I'll get to it. I'll show you. So what Annie kind of brought to the table is, well, that's very nice, all of it, but there's a lot of control condition that needs to be tested, and to really convince us that it's not an artifact of something else. For example, maybe it's an artifact of synchronization and not of replication. Another thing that comes into mind, maybe it's about the production aspects. Because, of course, in the tapping experiment, we have both production and perception. What is more important, perception and production? So there are a couple of natural controls that are needed here. We've done a lot of them in the paper. I'm going to describe you briefly some of them, and if there is more interest, I can also come back to the Q&A for further more. So basically, now I'm going to need to convince you that the results are robust to those kind of manipulation by performing a series of controls. Okay, so first thing that comes to mind, it's the embodied cognition, right? Maybe it's the hand, maybe it's the movement itself that produces these results. So then we figure out that a nice control for that would be to change the production modality. So we do the same experiment, but instead of tapping, you're going to tune. We do a tuning. So we ask participants to synchronize by tuning. Let's do it. Let's see if you can do it. Okay, I'm going to play the rhythm and you're going to tune. Okay? Okay, you can do it. I'm impressed because usually this is a place where people are a little bit embarrassed to do the task in front of other people, but usually probably experienced time people, so we can do the task. So okay, so the basic idea is that because this is a different production modality, and it's have different affordances. As you know, language is less periodic than music. So the production modality of vocalizing is able to is able to do things that are less periodic. So that was the idea. The result is there's almost no difference between the two production modalities. So the distribution we got qualitatively and also quantitatively, the correlation between them were almost identical. Okay, so production modality doesn't change it much. It's more related to some other aspect. The question that Annie asked is about replication from memory versus synchronization. So that's really important, whether it's crucial to synchronize the task or not. So to do that, we either synchronize, okay, or play the rhythm once or a couple of times and then replicate it from memory. So then you play the rhythm 3 times and then you're going to replicate it. Let's try and do it. Wow, that's impressive. So and note that we had to change something important here because we realized that when if you notice the tempo here is faster than I showed you before. And this is because when we tried to do it in a slower tempo, it was very difficult to replicate something from memory for the long term because of working on strengths. So that was a confirm that we need to change the tempo, but as you can see, it's actually pretty important. So basically, when we compare synchronization for memory and replication, the weights were highly correlated, even though there were nuanced differences between the two conditions. But overall, the results were very similar. If you look at the distribution, they look a little bit different from the one I previously showed you. And we were wondering what is the reason for that. And we realized that basically it's the effect of tempo. So in a different experiment, we completely replicate the experiment and we change the tempo and we notice that actually most of the difference comes from the tempo difference. So this is basically interesting because this was basically a prediction of some symmetrical theories, for example, of Justin London book would predict that actually different tempi would perceive it in a different way. So that was consistent with that. And it also, another control experiment that we did is notice that these rhythms are cyclically repeated. So there's inherited symmetry in the presentation of the rhythm. So if I play you a rhythm like that, okay, and I play a rhythm that this is a 1-1-2 rhythm, and I play you a 1-2-1 rhythm. So if you don't listen carefully to the beginning, basically these two rhythms sounds the same because of the repetition. So to make sure that it's not that is causing a major effect, what we did was create a rhythm where one of the tones is more loud than others. Okay, so it sounds something like that. So the reason one of the tones is louder than the others, and that breaks the symmetry. And again, differences, but the weights were overall correlated, and the picture was not changing so much because of that manipulation. And in terms of quantitative, the weights were highly correlated. So to conclude, what we see is that it's independent from production modality. Tempo has some effect. But in all cases, we got those integer ratios. The picture we never get something that is very, very much away from integer ratios. In all those cases, the peaks, when we measure it quantitatively, was highly overlapping with integer ratio proportions. Why this integer ratio proportion comes? Why they are happening here? Maybe it's a biologically determined mechanism, as I said at the beginning. So we need to test that by doing cross-cultural reform and test what is left. So that's what we did. We went to the Bolivian Amazon, and it's a group of population that was studied earlier on by Josh McDermott, which I was part of his lab at that time. And what's interesting about the Chimane is they basically live in an area where they wouldn't have a lot of access to Western music, simply because it's not available. Even if they would have a radio machine, we would not have a battery for the radio machine, so if they have battery, they can do better usage than listen to radios. And so it's basically a group. It's not a remote tribe living out there and never had contact with the Western world, but they still keep a very traditional way of life, and they don't have a lot of exposure to Western music. And indeed, Josh McDermott showed that in terms of pitch perception and other musical cognition construct, they are very much different from Westerners. And you can read about it in his paper that came out this summer. What I wanted to show you is the result with rhythms. So these are participants in Boston. This is the distribution with favorite participants in Boston, and these are the Chimane. So the difference is very striking here. These are the images. So there's some commonality. So for example, in the jingle bell patterns, it's common in both patterns, in both cultures, and in a way, even in similar ways, even though it's hard to say. But other patterns, for example, the 3-2-3 pattern, which is 3-3-3, typically common in popular music. And this is how it's something like that. Totally absent from the distribution of the Chimane, but it's common in Western music. Another thing that come up strongly in Chimane is some kind of swung, maybe prosodic, kind of short, long pattern that deviates significantly from integer ratios. And this is pretty interesting that we found it potentially connected to the way that the music is related to speech. So they have a kind of prosodic song singing that we think that might be the reason for that, but we need to explore that further on.
What is the task that somebody are doing? Are they tapping? Are they
just tapping?
Vocal?
No, just tapping. All right, so just say that the results are kind of consistent with what we know about the music. There was some musicological work on them. This is a recording from the 70s of the If you hear the quality of the recording is not too good, that's what we have basically. We made a couple of more recordings of the music. We're very compelling music, especially very interesting in relation to the text and the music. But basically what I'm saying, what I want to crack a short story, is that basically the structure of the music that we find in the music is kind of consistent with what we find. For example, the jingle bell patterns is indeed a pattern that comes very often in the music, so it's consistent with that. And so if we compare the role of expertise, musical expertise, with the role of culture, so these are results with musicians and non-musicians in Boston, and this is cross-cultural differences. You see that cross-cultural differences are much more prominent than musical expertise here. This is very interesting and kind of surprising. So the paradigm works with the shamanic. The difference seems to likely reflect differences in musical exposure, because that's the main difference between the shamanic and the Westerners. If you believe in a very naive and strict version of biologically determined mechanism, including narrow oscillation, then you have a problem with our results. As the results showing that there's a significant role of exposure, you get a different distribution. So if it was all biology, that's not consistent with the results. Of course, the results are consistent with a more elaborate and kind of more nuanced, detailed version of biologically determined mechanism, in which there is some role for exposure to change and modulate your perception. And it's interesting that passive exposure is sufficient to develop highly structured fibers. That's interesting. And the effect of culture seems to be larger than the effect of expertise. And the takeoff message is priors and rhythms have modes and integer ratios. They are similar from expert and non-expert. And it's interesting that they are non-verbal for non-experts or non-musicians. They are likely to apply via passive exposure, and priors differs across cultures, and so it's not constrained by biology. But both cases we see some integer ratios. So if we go back to the question of neural oscillation and some other biologically determined mechanism, it required setting 3 parameters that kind of readjust for different cultures in order to make it work. But we need definitely more cross-cultural data to know whether the current models are good enough to explain music from other culture. So I'm going to describe you what I'm going to do this fall. I'm going to go together with my colleague Rainer Pollack to a group of people in Mali. And the reason why Mali is interesting specifically because the music have non-integer ratio rhythms, subdivisions specifically. I play you a non-integer ratio rhythm, and I want you to tap on your tap together with the rhythm. Tap whenever you want to beat that subdivision. It's not that easy to tap that. It doesn't sound very strange, but when you try to actually tap, it's much more difficult. I just want to make sure, tell you that this music becomes very fast this time. What's interesting is if you look at the subdivision rate between the rhythms, it's exactly, even though there's that massive tempo change, the ratio doesn't change. It's precisely in the like 2-3% accuracy level, very, very precise. And we made a corpus analysis. This is published recently, in the last year. We made a corpus analysis, really kind of trying to do a lot of statistical analysis of musicians' production to show that they actually maintain this ratio in the high precision. So basically, they had a rhythm with non-integer subdivision. Nevertheless, that's what experts are doing. It's not clear whether non-musicians actually grasp this very complex structure, and that's what we're trying to do. We're going to run this paradigm in this culture and see with non-expert and expert, and see if they internalize the rhythm, and especially if they produce in their mind non-integer subdivisions, as you would think. And I'm trying to do that the same thing in other cultures. So I'm started a project that all of you can join if you are running experiments somewhere else on the planet. And we're trying to do a collaboration where you can do this experiment in different cultures. potentially get into something like a 15 different culture. Here is some data from Botswana that I collected with the collaborator, just Brian Van Cameron, that went there this fall. And you see that the picture is interesting. It's slightly different weights in the group of population that they've studied, some culture, and in the newest participant, but overall their integer ratio peaks in both cultures. So that seems to be something that we see across cultures. Yes, thank you very much. That's about it. I mentioned that we also try to do this paradigm also for speech rhythms, but you can. I don't need to describe that currently because it's all kind of appears in papers, so you can have a look there, or I can answer more about it in Q&A. And I want to thank Josh McDermott and other people involved in this project. You see, there's sometimes difficulties to get the experiment. Yes, thank you very much.
I have seen an experiment using this iterative reproduction method in handwriting squiggles. And the results were very different in the sense, clearly there was like a continuous one-time change towards some preferred squiggle, but that was different across individuals. And my first thought was, what is so different in spatial reproduction versus potential reproduction? And I think one conjecture is it's not as confined a space as the space of sequential time intervals. The other one then was, what the authors, Sanger, did not do is to look at landmarks in the motor production, such that there might be a temporal structure, a simple integer ratio temporal structure occurring that is embedded within a continuous medium. So I just wanted to bring it up with your very last thought to go into different domains. So in random squiggle iterative reproduction, there might be also implicitly the intervals arising.
So I think you mentioned something very interesting. Yes, I mean, there's a lot of literature showing iterative. So those experiments are done in two different contexts. One of them trying to characterize drivers, like I did. Another interpretation for the same experiment is to simulate cultural transmission. Now, mathematically speaking, the models describing these two different types of experiments are identical. In both cases, converge to icon-driven things under an internal representation that are shared across participants. So it's the same experiment, two very different interpretations. Now, together with our paper, my colleague Andrea Ravignani came up with a similar experiment that was doing basically the same thing, like squiggling by rhythms. He was using longer rhythms sequences. And like squiggling, he showed that it converged different results for different participants. And apparently, different groups of those experiments give you different results. So even in rhythm, you can do the same task and supposedly get different results for different participants. But I want to emphasize that I think it's an artifact of something in the experiment. Is exactly what you pointed out. The difference is that when you look at very long sequence or unconstrained movement, the dimensionality of that space is huge. So think what happens. You start with a random seed somewhere in this space. Or even if you start with the very same position, you're on the top of a mountain, a high dimensional mountain, and you go down the mountain. You'll get, every time that you try to do that, you're going to get a different position. So even if the distribution is identical, very, very same across participants, even if everything is the same, when you do the experiment in high dimensional space, you get different results. Okay? So that's as an artifact, and I think it's not well controlled in those experiments. It's just not interpreting the right thing because they're presenting a very, very high dimensional space, and then they're surprised that you get a different result. Even here, if you start near 131, you will end up in 131. If you start near 112, you're gonna end up with this 112. You're not likely to go very far away, but because here the space is very much constrained, then of course the results are more, seems to be apparently more consistent, but they aren't. They are simply confined to a low-dimensional space. So this is a confound in this research. Now, whether there is specific things like motifs or multiple motifs that come up, because potentially when you work with that longer sequence, I totally agree about that. It's very likely that it happens. We just don't see that in simple rhythm because we're working with such short kind of time period. But I think you're right.
But I mean, just to say that again, there may be very simple temporal sequences arising. Let's say if you look at maximum excursion and velocity and reversals, such that over the seemingly unconstrained and multidimensional space in space, the temporal features may similarly.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I mean, if you look at the Random results that published in parallel for us in Nature Human Behavior, they show something like that. They show that there are certain patterns, repeated motifs that become more and more comes out in the data. So I think that's in rhythm. I'm just saying that I think it's likely to see that across domains. But there seems to be. But if you think of what it means, if you have a very long sequence, there's other operations that are not related to a prior distribution, not related to their exposure, it's related to your working memory constraints. And these are pushing you to do this repeated structure that are easier to are more chunkable. So I think there's an interesting interaction between the two, but it's the difference, or the reason, the point where it becomes very important is when we have memory version. Yes.
Hi, I have a very interesting talk. I have two questions. First, I'm not convinced that it's passive, so I would like you to explain more why you think it's passively, it's a passive listening that's going on here, and why that's significant. And then the next thing is, what about developmental time course for creating these fibers?
Okay, this is a great question. So the reason why I think it's a passive exposure is related to a couple of results. So putting them together, I think it's more consistent with passive exposure. A, that you don't see a difference between musicians and non-musicians, which they basically differ in the active engagement. So if it was all about active engagement, different levels of active engagement would generate different results.
But don't you think culturally people can actively engage in cultural popular music and popular dance and drumming and not really report that as musical experience because they're not a djembe drummer in a local
Yes, but I think it's very obvious that if you spend, musicians here are spending a large chunk of their day doing that. So if that was critical, you would get a difference in that perspective. Not because the other participants have no exposure whatsoever with active participatory, but it's not essential, or it's at least that's kind of the argument. The other thing is that the other thing that kind of goes together with it is that we didn't see a modality differences. And so when we do the different modalities, it doesn't ruin everything, or it doesn't change much.
You mean in terms of production?
Production modalities, or tapping into, right? So if it wasn't representation that is somehow, so if it was the extreme embodied cognition description of rhythm is that basically it's about the hand movement itself. That's a kind of a closed loop that is not related to mental representation at all. It's just a closed dynamical system with the body. So that's not consistent with the result, because if this is the case, when you change the dynamical system, you get a different attraction.
So I think you answered the significance of it as well as why. Then what about development? Like, do you think that this is really a perceptual development because people have all kinds of theories about motor teaching and perception of hearing and vice versa?
Okay, that's a great question. I mean, we're working on it and collaborating with Aaron Hannon in her group, and hopefully we're going to make it money in a developmental trajectory similar to the.
So, like, would you take a foreigner that moves to Botswana and learns there, or one of your cultures, Mali or whatever, you take somebody who came there at a certain age, you know, just analogous to the age.
Yeah,
of
so
music.
one of the interesting things that I'm looking at different cultures, different places in the world, different groups of people, maybe we can identify people that are, you know, musicians or people that came in a certain age to a different culture. So this is something I'm trying to look, different types of exposure or different types of things. Another thing that is interesting, especially for these audiences, maybe language is playing a role. So looking at different cultures, maybe similar musical exposure but different languages. So that's something I'm testing with players in Korea. And the idea is that all of those cultures together, maybe together, gives a story of what's out there, of the what's going on in terms of the. I don't think you can do one single experiment and you know.
Maybe just related to that, the studies they've done on perfect pitch, on pitch perception, and you get a much more profound developmental effect when there's a saliency with language, like Mandarin, where you require pitch as opposed to just music, right? And so I don't know what the driver is in terms of the perception. It's almost going back to the biology. Is the perception just the biology in terms of how they're made up to passively listen to these? Or is there really something in terms of the social saliency for them to engage in that sound?
Okay, so again, it's a great question, but I think that's the only way to really advance here is to actually do the experiment. And I think once, I don't know, I basically, I think all of your suggestions are candidates that may play a big role, and just need to do the experiment to see that. Yes.
I'm just struck by the analogs between this and pitch interval perception. I mean, that the triangle, the 112 there, put that back up.
Mm-hmm.
Those are octave relations.
Yeah.
The 112, 211, and 121, those are all octave relations. The 233, 323, and 332 are fifths. And the 223, 322, 232 are fourths, basically, in terms of pitch intervals. So has anyone tried to use this methodology to study musical pitch intervals?
Okay, so that's a great question. So first of all, I'm working on using the same methodology for pitch. So that's possible. That's a different trajectory than that. Just it's a possible avenue follow up, and I think it's in sense I have some preliminary data show that it can be actually work. So this is interesting, right on. But with respect to your question, I mean, different paradigm is this paradigm that Joshua Drummond ran with the Chimane. So this is his recent paper from the summer, but it was just preferences.
That's preferences.
And then
just references on productions or percepts.
Agree, but in terms of in preference, there was flat response. So when we had when Josh made those participants listen to intervals, pitch intervals, so these are chords, they didn't show any preference to any.
I'm not suggesting that those two things are linked in a particular culture. But the nature of the underlying mechanisms and representations might have some commonalities. Because I think of musical invariants of melody and music pitch intervals under transposition as being very similar to invariants of rhythmic pattern under tempo, ages and tempo. They're all time warpings, if seen in a particular way. In pitch interval experiments, they usually transpose the interval to some other key in order to eliminate just direct pitch matching. Mm-hmm. So you actually could do the similar kind of experiment where you either ask people to speed up the rhythm when they repeat it, and that would take out the factors related to, say, remembering the exact timing. It would get it, it would
Okay,
get
so
some
that's,
ratio issues.
that's a little bit difficult to do experimentally, but it's possible.
Yeah. Or you do a recognition experiment where you present them with a particular rhythm and then you warp the tempo one way or the other and ask them if it's the same rhythm and look at the accuracy of that. That would be easier.
So I think these are interesting suggestions, and thank you for that. One thought about this equivalence between pitch and rhythm. Analogy. Well, it's very compelling. Intellectually, it's very compelling, and I think we have a history of that intuition being a very prominent thing in our culture. But we have to be careful about it, and I'm especially for me working doing this corpus analysis with my colleagues on Mali music, where basically you don't see integer ratio proportion at an important level of the.
You don't see any 2 to 1?
Well, you do see
No,
2 to
1?
1. You do see those ratios, but at the same time, you also see very prominent
Additional ratio.
Additional
Yes.
ratios.
Well, so that's very much like this situation with scales. All cultures have the octave. Almost all have the fifth. There are a few that don't have fourths. And then there are other areas of the pitch space that are covered. So some of this is whether you're looking for differences, whether you're focusing on cultural differences or universals or near universals.
Yes, but to me, I mean, because this is intellectually compelling, and we might be biased intellectually here, I think the way to go is to test that empirically. And that's exactly where I'm heading. I think this is a little bit circular because we have big intuitions, but we are not sure about those intuitions. And it's, some integer ratio proportion. If you look at the data, well, you can say, oh, we found integer ratio proportions. But then you see, oh, the distribution is very different across culture. So it's kind of both. And I think that the main way to go would simply run doing the experiments multiple places. And then you see whether the analogy to pitch makes you something that makes you a prediction that is valid.
Yeah.
So can I chime in just for a second? What is an integer ratio? So when do you say I found an integer ratio and you say I don't? So you showed that Samani, right? And you showed 2 peaks in your distribution that weren't at the integer ratios. And you had a little arrow pointing to the integer ratio and you said, these are integer ratios, they're just skewed a little bit. And then you showed the corpus analysis of the Mali rhythm, and you said these aren't integer ratios. So I think one question is, how do you actually decide when you're looking at an integer ratio? Because in the real world, nothing's an integer ratio. Right?
Sure. So there's a way to operationalize it.
Yeah.
So first of all, it's a great question. So basically, the way I'm going to show you some of the figures. So the way we operationalized that was we simply look at the parameter and look all the integer ratio at things with numbers 1 to 20. Now that defines a set of 21 integer ratio. We operationalize the distribution. What we noticed that particular set overlaps in a significant way with the distribution. It overlaps significantly with the distribution that we see in the world. So the claim that it's integer ratio, the distribution of integer ratio is operationalized to significant under these distributions. So the overlap between those points.
For a significant difference in the distribution.
Now,
between the peak and the.
So we pre-assume those peaks, and then we found that they overlap with the distribution. So that I think it's a valid argument. And then when you're saying that it's a skewed version of it, now you take the data, you assume that the peaks are around those points, and you fit the model, and if it significantly deviates from 0, which is in most cases not the case, then you say it deviates significantly. Of course, you can say it's also positioned somewhere else that happens to be nearby. But this is not consistent if it just by chance, if it was these points just merely point by chance, then you don't find significant overlap between this pre-existing group of members. So there's nuanced technical details here, but I want to show something that
I think they're important. I just want to point out that those technical details are quite important to the conclusions.
I agree. But I think that the solution is pretty good. But I want to show you something very interesting. So this is a graph that I put all the simple integer ratios that are not 1, 1, 1, 2, and 3. So these are the set of all the simple integer ratios that contains 4 and 5, and are not part of the group of one simple integer ratio that contains 1, 2, and 3. All right, so what you see here is that miraculously, all those non-simple integer ratio are right there in the black spots of the distribution, right? So it means that the other non-simple integer ratio, of course, every rhythm could be approximately some complex non-integer ratios, but those complex ratios tend to fall exactly in the black spot of this distribution. And it's also, you can quantify that. So in some sense, this simple integer ratio, the set of groups that we selected, somehow describe well the distribution. And the rest of other complex simple integer ratios are not, the complex integer ratios are not overlapping well. And if you go to higher order, of course, you eventually fill the entire space. Yeah.
Good answer.